Listen to this podcast, or I'll gut you.
Welcome back, Horror Hounds, to Ghostman Rivera's Horror Show podcast. Today we're going to be discussing comic book films in horror. I mean, everybody knows at this point, superhero movies, comic book movies, they're all the rage. I think both Mike and I can honestly say we both grew up reading comic books, so we do have an appreciation for it. So this should be interesting because as much as we associate superheroes with comics, and that is a big part of it, feel like horror is very indebted to comic books. When you think about Tales from the Crypt, like all those old EC comics, and there's a lot there. It's obviously vastly different genres, but they overlap more than you realize. And I think that the movies don't do it as good as the comic books do, but today we're going to discuss some ones that hopefully we do think do it as good as comic books do.
Yeah, because comic book movies with horror elements almost seems like a new trend because they've been trying it a lot lately and failing. But I think what it is, we're going to discuss some older films that did it years ago. But the difference is these films that we're going to discuss, they already had horror elements. They're inherently horror stories that are put into a comic book movie.
Mm-hmm.
But now the trend is now that they're trying to take stories that weren't inherently horror and put horror elements in them and bring them out, and they keep failing. But I think they did it right with Doctor Strange, and I think it's because of Sam Raimi.
I think so too. I think all of the three movies that we're going to discuss are more successful at incorporating horror elements than 90% of the movies that try it. But these three movies actually have horror in the comics, so I guess that makes the transition a little bit more successful too.
As we know with Doctor Strange, there was a lot of excitement about it back when it was going to be Scott Derrickson again. And this would, when rumors started circulating, this was going to be straight horror. And, Scott Derrickson did Sinister, so everybody was all excited about it. Then they pulled the rug out from under us and say, oh, no, Scott Derrickson left because of creative differences. But then they made the best decision they possibly could by hiring Sam Raimi. We're first going to go over Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. It's classified on IMDb as action, adventure, fantasy, horror, sci-fi. And it seems like that order, too. It's like mostly action, adventure with fantasy, and then the horror comes in.
Yeah.
But quite a few horror elements, though. This is the 28th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and has a $200 million budget. And you can pretty much see it all on screen. As we said, directed by Sam Raimi. This is his first feature in 9 years. It's written by Michael Waldron. This is his first feature film. He produced Loki and wrote 2 of the episodes, and then he produced 10 Rick and Morty episodes and wrote the Old Man and the Sea episode of Rick and Morty.
That makes sense because I think Rick and Morty even does a Doctor Strange parody in one episode where Rick has the cape. And I really honestly think that a big reason we're getting these multiverse concepts in more mainstream movies is partially because Rick and Morty has become such like a big thing in pop culture. I think it's kind of normalized the concept of a multiverse, or the idea of there being multiple versions of the same person across infinite realities and infinite universes. And that always existed in comic books, I think, since the 70s. They've been doing that for a long time. I don't think they had the balls to put that into a movie until Rick and Morty actually kind of like solidified it as a mainstream thing.
And also because of Rick and Morty, a lot of it is for comedic effect, but it's also has some very deep moments, very layered moments in it.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, yeah, definitely. But I could definitely see some of the Doctor Strange, some of the Rick and Morty influence on here.
Yeah, for sure. Even some of the goofiness and stuff, too.
Yeah.
This one, once again, stars Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange, Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda, Benedict Wong returns as Wong, Shaktil Gomez, is that America Chavez's name? Shaktil Gomez. She's from a Babysitter's Club, so it's fairly new actress, and she's really good. And Rachel McAdams returns as Christine, the love interest of Doctor Strange. The synopsis is Doctor Strange casts a forbidden spell that opens the doorway to the multiverse including alternate versions of himself, and the threat to humanity may be too great for the combined forces of Strange, Wong, and Wanda. One of the first great things about this movie, music by Danny Elfman. That's always great to see music by him.
I got to be honest with you. I've kind of been disillusioned with Danny Elfman for about 10, 12 years now. I think Danny Elfman is one of the greatest composers in the history of Hollywood, and he's done so many memorable scores. And there was a time whenever I saw Danny Elfman's name appear, I was like, oh, cool, I got excited. These days, if I'm being honest, it makes my eyes roll a little bit because I think his scores are starting to grow generic and they all sound the same. And the fact is he's done way too many superhero movies at this point that I think he's struggling to come up with something. He did Tim Burton's Batman movies, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies, the Avengers, the theatrical version of Justice League, and now this. I think this is his most inspired work in a long time. Like, this is like the Danny Elfman who I used to get excited for whenever I saw his name on the credits. And I think it's because this movie is a little bit different from the other stuff that he's been doing lately, that it's afforded him new ways to experiment. Like, I don't know if you agree with me, but you say this is his best score in a long time.
Oh yeah, and it also works well with the other elements, like the Evil Dead elements in there, the more horror elements kind of mixed with. His music mixed well with Sam Raimi's horror style.
I think so,
for sure.
It's good to have him back.
Yeah. So his score was really good, and then so the cinematography was really good on this. And I didn't notice because there's so much going on. You don't notice how much of it has to do with the cinematography. Well, I didn't until about halfway through. But it's done by John Matheson. He did Gladiator, Hannibal, Matchstick Men, X-Men First Class, Logan, and he did the recent Batgirl.
He's on a roll right now, then.
The kills in this movie. Love the kills, and some of them seem a little graphic for PG-13 too, which is also a pleasant surprise. This is definitely the most violent MCU film to date. There's an exploding head. There's someone falling and being impaled. Mr. Fantastic stretched and ripped apart.
And his
blood
head,
and everything. Like,
his head pops like a grapefruit.
Yeah, and there's not a whole lot of blood, but there's enough.
I think the implied gore is enough. We get see somebody's head get blown out from the inside and their brains kind of cave in. We see a character that audiences were cheering for 5 minutes earlier get bisected in half with their own weapon. I love that element. This movie brutalizes the superheroes.
Yeah, because I like the effect too. Like, he kind of focuses in on their upper half, and you're kind of looking in their eyes. And you can tell by the sound effects and just the look in their eyes that the bottom part of their body just fell off.
Yeah.
And then all the sorcerers being attacked.
Yeah.
When the big powerful being comes in and attacks all the sorcerers, and they're just, brutally being killed. It happens so fast. A lot of the most brutal kills kind of just fly by you, but they're still fucking brutal.
Definitely.
And it takes us to one of my favorite scenes of the movie. It's probably the most fascinating visuals of the film, when Doctor Strange and America Chavez fall through the different multiverses.
Mm-hmm.
And they fall through exactly 20 multiverses. And every one of them has something, an interesting look about it. There's some animated sequences, some where their bodies are bifurcated, like into pieces. Really cool sequence, the whole thing.
A lot of what I like about this movie, and it fixes a lot of problems I have with Marvel's MCU movies, is, well, a lot of these movies are fun. I enjoy a lot of them. They lose a kind of rewatchability factor because they're all done in this very generic style, as if they don't want to upset fans. So, like, when filmmakers are dragged into these projects, they rarely ever get to put their stamp or a directorial vision on them. And I think that's been my biggest problem with Marvel movies. They don't allow for stuff like the Batman, which is very cinematic and very individualistic in its style. That's what I wanted to see more in Marvel, and I see it a lot more here. They actually allow Sam Raimi to be Sam Raimi in this movie. And I get the feeling that, and from what I understand, he was hired because the original Doctor Strange elements, I wouldn't call them horror comic books per se, but they have heavy horror elements in there. And there's a lot of creepy shit that happens within those comic books. And I don't think that the first Doctor Strange movie did a very good job of communicating some of those horror elements. So I figured that they wanted a director who is really going to bring that out. And who better than Sam Raimi, because he has experience with horror and with superheroes with the Spider-Man trilogy. I would argue it goes back even further, because I think there's a case to be made that Ash is a horror superhero.
Yeah.
He has a comic book series where he's battling Freddy and Jason. So he, to me, is a wisecracking horror superhero. So he blends perfectly with this universe. He knows exactly what to do with this type of film. And he still knows how to make it work within the framework of being an MCU movie, a Marvel movie within a larger universe. It still serves that, but he's still allowed to put his stamp on it, put his personality on it, without making it seem like it's completely breaking what this universe is.
He's also experienced with horror comedy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why the goofiness of it works. I think I told you before, the main reason why I love this movie is that there's so many different aspects of it going on. It's not a one-trick pony at all.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of serious drama in it. There's really good action. There's goofiness in it. Even the goofiness, the fight with musical notes is one of the goofiest things I've seen in one of the MCU movies, but it all works because it's in this amalgamation of Sam Raimi's style where he throws everything at you.
I think the musical notes sequence where they're like, I think one of them is battling with like the notes to the Phantom of the Opera. It might be, I'm pretty sure, I think it's the Phantom of the Opera. That is pretty goofy and silly, but it's also some of the most imaginative stuff we've seen in a comic book movie in a long time. Some of the things, like something that actually like pops and seems unique or original. And he makes everything like, I feel like, I do think, thinking about this movie, there are some flaws in the writing. And I think that with a lesser director or a more generic filmmaker, those flaws would be more apparent. So I do have some issues with the movie, but they're not even that big of issues because Sam Raimi does such a good job of taking you on a ride that you actually don't really notice what they are until you think about them too deep. I feel like Sam Raimi is having way too much fun and getting the audience caught up in his little fun house that you don't really have time to think about things like that. And I think that's one of the best things about this is Sam Raimi's style is so over. Like anytime that you have too long to think about something, he's throwing something else completely new at you, or he's going to shock you here. And there are so many moments here that really surprise me. And what I like about this is the villain, Wanda, the Scarlet Witch, played by Elizabeth Olsen, who is the younger sister of Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen. Looks just like them too. Doesn't look like the third twin, but you could totally tell it's them. She's always been a witch in the series, and she was even a witch on the show WandaVision, and she does some pretty nefarious things. But it's always been like an MCU version of what a witch is. You know, you have to make it a little bit more friendly. I think Sam Raimi actually played up the witch elements of that character a lot more and made her more sinister than she's ever been portrayed on screen. And it's things like that that help this movie to elevate it above a lot of the other superhero movies out there.
Well, it was like you explained before, it was things that had things in the story that were already done in WandaVision. And then it had things in the story that were already done in Spider-Man, in the last Spider-Man film, but still, you throw it, you give it all to Sam Raimi, and he's going to make it work.
Mm-hmm. And it does remind me a lot more of his Evil Dead movies and Drag Me to Hell than Spider-Man. I get more vibes. Yeah. The vibes I get off of it are closer to those movies than Spider-Man.
Yeah, and he almost turns the flaws in the movie into another entertaining thing, just another thing to entertain you.
Yeah.
But I love one of my favorite horror sequences in this is one of the characters' dream walks, where there's a lot of dream walking in here, which is actually like astral projection into another multiverse.
It's also a nicer way of possession.
Yeah.
It's a nicer way of saying possession. You're possessing other people's bodies.
Yes. So when you see one of these characters dream walk into this other dimension, and then they're essentially haunting an alternate version of themselves, which was a pretty effective horror scene. It worked in the whole scheme of the movie. I love that part.
I mean, I think that's one of the first, the scenes where it becomes apparent who directed this movie is the dream walking sequence where Wanda is trying to enter another version of herself, another body. It plays very much like a possession scene, like a demon entering your house and turning everything askew. I thought that was a pretty creepy when Wanda, the nice version of Wanda, is walking through her house, and then it turns all Evil Dead too, where the pictures start turning and smiling and waving, and then
Yeah.
Sam Raimi with his the camera starts stretching and the music starts getting ominous and weird. Anybody familiar with the Evil Dead movies will like start to see will recognize so many of the flourishes in here. You see it there. You see it in the scene. One of my favorite sequences is when Wanda tries to break into the sanctum and
Yeah.
they're all barricading it. It is exactly like an Evil Dead scene. Like right when she's about to like thump on the other side, the camera still starts going askew. You see the camera rushing through, people bumping, and then Wanda trying to get into the house using reflections and little eye and the way that her eyes open here and there. And when she finally gets through a mirror, she crawls out all weird like an Evil Dead character. Like it's not like just her jumping into the house like a triumphant like you would usually see in these. I think most directors would have her break-in scene look
Yeah.
very like triumphant. Here they make it look weird and creepy that when she finally goes through, it's like a demon just crawled out of your mirror. It's stuff like that that gives this movie a unique touch and a unique flavor.
Yeah, it does. And then the other dream walking sequence where a character dream walks into his own corpse, that was very Sam Raimi too.
Yes, there's the Doctor Strange corpse. So Doctor Strange actually gets to perform some superheroic feats as a zombie version of himself with the cape that's made up of the damned and tortured souls to ride on. And it's stuff like that. And the moment that I kind of smiled because I know Sam Raimi's personality, like his directorial personality and his sense of humor, that the moment they announced it was going to happen, even before he's dream walking into another universe. And what does the character say? She's like, what? She said, but there's no version of you over there that's alive. And he's like, well, who said I had to be alive? And that was the cool part. I was like, oh shit, he's about to resurrect a corpse. Stuff like that's pretty cool.
Yeah, all the visuals of that, and then the demon makeup kind of looked like a deadite type of makeup.
Totally.
He
I
really
even thought it
sold the
was kind of
horror.
funny that half of his mouth was missing, but he was still pronouncing like things that he should not be pronouncing if half of your lips are gone. But still, it's Sam Raimi. Stuff like that is made this a fun ride.
And then some of these scenes where the characters like dip into these other dimensions like that, if you think of it in the context of that other character from their point of view, it's straight up horror.
Mm-hmm.
If you think of it like, oh shit, they must be scared shitless right now.
Exactly.
And then there's that sequence that you and I both loved where it's they introduce all these heroes
Mm-hmm.
and they're so smug and so entitled, and they say, oh, we're smarter than all you. Just kick back, Doctor Strange. We'll take care of this. And then they all get wiped out in the most graphic way possible.
And look, all right, and this is the part where the controversy comes in, because I've noticed this. I've noticed, and because I spent a lot of time on TikTok, the horror community on TikTok seems to love this movie. They seem to going batshit and ape shit for it. I see a lot of film fans enjoying this movie. It's Marvel fans who are really upset about this, and I think a lot of them expected this movie to be a cameo fest. I think after last year with Spider-Man No Way Home and those 3 different versions of Spider-Man, a lot of Marvel fans that this is going to be the next step. This is just going to be nonstop variants of different characters, and that's not what we get here. We do get those cameos from heroes from different universes. We even get Captain Carter, which is an alternate version of Captain America, where Captain America is a female. We get a Captain Marvel who's black. We get a Professor X who's seems like it's suggesting that he's the Professor X from the animated X-Men series from the 90s. And all of these, and of course, the one that got the biggest applause, the one that always gets the biggest applause is John Krasinski
Yeah.
as Reed Richards from Mr. Fantastic, because the internet has been forcing that for so long, making memes of John Krasinski, that they just did it in the movie. That's how influential meme culture is at this point, that movies are now imitating memes. And you even saw that with the Spider-Man movie.
Yeah.
And all of these characters are dead within 10 minutes from the first time that you see them. Within 10 minutes, and they're smug, they're annoying, and they act superior. But what a lot of comic fans forget is that those characters in the comic books that group the Illuminati, they're a pretentious group of people. They think nobody is smarter than them. They think nobody can handle the information that they have, and they think that they're ordained to be the ones who carry out the true justice of the world and make the real decisions. So it only makes sense that they would get slaughtered like that, because their characters are supposed to be that smug and that irritating and that annoying. So when they get slaughtered, I'm like, yeah, of course. What is Stretchy Boy going to do against a witch?
Yeah, and I was actually gearing up for some kind of big battle right there, but man, she made short work of it.
Wasn't really much of a battle. If it was a battle, that was pretty one-sided, and you get it right away. You get Black Bolt, that one character, his brains get blown in, and his skull caves in on himself. Mr. Fantastic gets ripped to shreds before getting his head popped like a grapefruit. One of them gets crushed by a giant statue. Captain Carter gets bisected in half with her own shield. It's just nonstop. And then the one that actually shocked me the most, and I guess it's because it's the only one who's been in Marvel movies was before, is Professor X. We've seen this character in a bunch of X-Men movies and Logan, and this, by the way, this is the third time that actor has played Professor X, Patrick Stewart. He's died 3 times on screen as Professor X. I think that's kind of funny. But I think his is the most shocking death because he seems like he's the only one of that group who doesn't come across pretentious. He's the only one who comes across likable and sensible, and he still gets his neck snapped. And I love that scene. And it's so creepy the way that he's inside the good Wanda's head trying to save her, and that eerie smoke that comes out, and those demon hands that come from behind and just snap his neck in the dream world, and then you just see his neck snap in real life and fall forward. And as much as Marvel fans want to complain, I'm like, doesn't that give the movie more stakes, knowing that the villain could wipe out these beloved superheroes in an instant without and the fight not even really be much, the fight they put up not even be much of a threat against the villain.
Yeah, and because of Professor X having the intuition that the rest of the Illuminati didn't have, just the fact that he had that intuition to think, oh, maybe this Doctor Strange is going to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. So he had that intuition. So I thought, oh, he's going to be a more viable part of the story, but no. Done.
I think that's what makes his death more shocking. They set it out as like, there is a sensible person here, and he's a very powerful character, and he's trying to do the right thing, and then he just gets killed, like, brutally. I think he had the most effective, the most shocking death out of those characters, because he's the one who you thought maybe he's going to make it through. And then Sam Raimi being Sam Raimi, I would describe his movies as mischievous. That's a good way to describe it. So knowing him, he has to put the mischief, like, nope, head snapped, not going to happen. Yeah. They all get the Evil Dead treatment.
Yeah, they do. It's glorious too. But I have to say, the more I think about it, the more I think this has to be my favorite scene of the whole movie. So you got this final battle, right? Mm-hmm. And Wanda is just so unbelievably powerful. Just pretty much nobody has a chance with her. And then you see this poor America Chavez trying to go up against this massively powerful witch.
The most powerful witch in the multiverse.
Yeah, and America has some interesting powers, but she's still way out of her league. And she just almost being victimized by Wanda, and you're like, oh no, there's no way she's going to get out of this. And then in that split second, she has an idea where she transports Wanda into the universe where her kids are, where you've seen her kind of possess the other version of herself, being all doting with the kids and loving to them and hugging them all the time. And then all of a sudden, you see the kids in their living room, and the wall opens up, and there's their mom standing there as a witch, and the kids, I laughed. I thought it was exciting.
And you know what's funny about that? The kids are watching Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs at the time, and that has a wicked witch in there. And since that's driving the whole plot of the movie, is that she just wants to be in a universe where her kids are actually alive and she can, like, you know, have a life with them. And that one moment, she completely ruins her entire mission, that even if she's successful, it's too late. You've already been exposed to your kids as a witch. So if you were to come in that universe, kill that version of yourself and take over, those kids are never going to accept you as their mom. They're always going to view you as the witch who came out of the walls when they were kids, killed their mom, and ruined their life. So it renders her whole mission completely useless by that point. Whereas, like, technically she is powerful enough where she could do it now, but it's too late. They already know who you are. And yeah, I thought that was an awesome scene too.
And the fact that it was such a small scale little trick to just bam, throw a spoke in everything she was doing, throw a stick in the spokes of everything she was doing.
Yeah, she couldn't overpower her, but in that instant, she just made her mission pointless, because at that point, go ahead, you can probably complete your mission now, but it's never going to be what you want it to be. You're always going to be the witch to those children. They're never going to lose their mom.
And by the way, that's just one of the many reasons why I love that character, America Chavez. I'm a huge fan. I'm going to watch anything she does from now on.
Mm-hmm.
She's got me.
Oh yeah, I liked her. In fact, I would say one of the flaws I would say that's in the writing, but it's not really noticeable, is that she's good and I love her as a character, and she has one of the best moments in the movie in the finale. There's that section in the middle of the movie where she's almost like an NPC, where they're just dragging her from place to place and she's like a victim. Like, you don't really see her character arc. Like, you see her character arc is mostly handled in the opening scenes and in the ending. And in the middle of the movie, he doesn't get to do much because of everything that's going on. In all fairness, there's so much going on that I think to like put another character arc, like a fully developed character arc, like a fleshed out one, kind of would have been a lot. There's also a 2 hour and 40-minute version of this movie. There's like 40 minutes, so I don't know what's in those 40 minutes. But I'd say if there's one flaw in the writing, they could have made her more developed before they got to that point. But there's so much going on in the movie that you don't really notice these things while you're watching it. It's stuff that you have to really think about to like, yeah, I guess that's true. I guess they could have. I see a lot of complaints about them not exploring the multiverse concept enough. And I get that. I understand those points. But I think there's so much wild shit going on here, and Sam Raimi's putting up so many batshit crazy set pieces that as the movie's playing out, I don't really notice that. It's mostly these things I notice after the film is over and I'm thinking about. And I think that's a sign of a director, is like, he doesn't really give you time while you're watching it to think very deeply about these things. He's too busy entertaining you and wowing you from one scene to the next.
Yeah, well, it was filmed the same time as another multiverse movie, Spider-Man No Way Home. And Spider-Man was Doctor Strange was supposed to come first. So it was already always engineered that Spider-Man was the one where they're going to really explore the multiverses, where in Doctor Strange it's just a part of the plot that they go to different multiverses. So, and also
that makes sense in continuity.
America Chavez was supposed to appear she was always supposed to appear in the second of these two films. So they wrote her into Spider-Man No Way Home. And then when they found out that they were going to be scheduled different, then they pulled her character out of No Way Home and put her in this.
See, that's the thing. I think a lot of the flaws that come from this are flaws that are a natural byproduct of the way that these studios produce and make these movies, and the way that they have to keep arranging things while trying to keep a consistent timeline. Another complaint, and this is a very valid complaint too, I don't think it affects the movie, but if you're looking at this as like a wider universe, this makes the WandaVision series slightly redundant, because what it basically does is it takes this very developed character arc that they took a season of television to explore and redeem her after her being a villain, only for her to start off this movie like she never had that character arc in the first place, and then she becomes even more evil, and then she has to go through her emotional journey to realize that she's doing wrong. It's literally a repeat of the character arc from WandaVision. It just on a much more massive scale, and her acting more outright evil than she does in that show. But a lot of these things, like I said, that's a byproduct of having this massive universe and trying to control these things. It makes storytelling difficult in that regard. And there's a couple times within the first 15-20 minutes where, if you're not as familiar with these movies, you might be a little bit confused by some of the conversations that they're having when they talk about the blip and people being gone after 5 years and the Thanos snap. So if you, I don't say it's enough to like confuse you while you're watching the movie, but there are some things that you're not going to be able to pick up on if you're not familiar with these films. And all of these flaws are only, I think, come naturally because of the nature of what this universe is.
Well, it blows my mind to think about, how they cultivate these stories over multiple movies.
Mm-hmm.
And then something happens with COVID where there's a scheduling thing. So they have to switch the movies, and then they grab a character out of a $200 million movie and slap it into another $200 million movie. So it must be almost impossible to keep all that straight and cohesive.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's where, and I think that this universe is, like you said, this is the 28th movie. That doesn't count the 6 or 7 television series that they've had with this. And these are all different writers. These are all different directors. And they're not always consulting with each other while they're making their films. So I think people are upset about this. I'm like, you better get ready for more, because this universe, they have like plans for another 10 years. I'm like, do you think that's going to get easier for them to keep track of all this with 40 movies when you're 50 movies deep? There's naturally going to be some inconsistencies here and there. There's going to be some moments where character arcs are repeated, because if Sam Raimi had just paid attention to, like, I mean, I'm not saying that he didn't pay attention. If he just followed like the character arc of WandaVision straight into this, you wouldn't have a movie. And it becomes hard where other people's storylines interfere with the story that you're trying to tell in the movie that you're making. So it's inevitable that sometimes we're going to get repeated character arcs, some inconsistencies, some underdeveloped things because of all that's going on. And like you said, they switch it from here to here. So it's going to get worse. That's my honest opinion. It's going to get worse.
And it made me wonder why Wanda was already bad, already evil in her first opening scene in this movie. But really, what are you going to do? Spend another 30, 40 minutes in a 2-hour movie kind of working her back into, being good and essentially slipping back into evil? It wouldn't have worked.
No. And the thing is, Sam Raimi wanted to pace this a certain way, and that would have really slowed down the pacing. It would have taken a lot of the fun out of the movie, and it would have because you could see Sam Raimi's style in this, but I think you see his style through the whole thing, but I think his style picks up the more the frenetic the movie becomes. I think at the 20-minute mark, it becomes very, very obvious who directed this movie. And I think that in order to do, like you said, if they wanted to like ease her back into that, that would have taken like 30, 40 minutes of exposition scenes and a lot of stuff that, do we really need to see that? I don't think so. So yeah. I've already accepted that these movies are going to have their inconsistencies.
So let me ask you about the 40 minutes that was cut. Do you think a lot of that 40 minutes was horror? And do you think we'll ever see a director's cut?
I would like to see a director's cut, but it's hard to know what that 40 minutes consists of because that's a lot of time. I imagine the 40 minutes isn't just of any one thing. Like, I can't picture it being all the 40 minutes of horror scenes cut. I imagine there's probably some more multiverse stuff in there, like, how people wanted to see more universes explored.
Oh, yeah.
I imagine there's some of that. I imagine there's a little bit more horror, maybe a little bit more for America Chavez, but it is a possibility. And I think that I think this is probably the most likely thing. This probably is the director's cut because Marvel Studios and movie studios in general are not afraid of ballooning the length of superhero movies. They're all long now. They're all over 2.5 hours. Like, isn't that a common thing for them to be pushing the 3-hour point in superhero movies? That's the norm. That's the standard. So I don't think they cut it because they were afraid audiences don't have the attention spans for 3-hour movies. Like, they've been pushing those out and they've been massively successful. I have a feeling it's because it just is paced better at 2 hours than it is as a 2-hour and 40-minute movie. I could be wrong. I would like to see what's in it, but I have a feeling that it's this way because Sam Raimi thought this was the proper pacing for this movie because all the other ones are really long.
Yeah. Well, the only reason I think that it might be a lot of horror is just that how a lot of horror filmmakers do, where they really go over the top when they film the horror. Mm-hmm. And film a lot of really graphic stuff just so the MPAA will have something to take out. But I have a feeling maybe Sam Raimi didn't do a lot of that in this one. I think he knew what horror elements he was going to put in it.
Yeah, I think so too. And it is a PG-13 movie. You can only take that so far. I think as far as like the gore elements, it comes closer to Drag Me to Hell than
Yeah.
it does to the Evil Dead, which is fine because Drag Me to Hell is awesome, and it showed that that's a movie that showed you can do the Sam Raimi style without making the gore over the top and still effectively communicate the idea. So I think he already is skilled at modifying the Evil Dead formula for a PG-13 rating.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I wanted to talk about, there's quite a few, even more Evil Dead nods than I noticed the first time.
There's a lot.
First of all, of course, Sam Raimi's own 1973 Oldsmobile Delta 88. It's the one that was in all the Evil Dead movies, the Spider-Man movies and everything. It makes an appearance in the decaying universe of the evil Doctor Strange. It's kind of floating, facing down, kind of floating in the air, spinning.
Yeah.
That was cool to see. This is one I didn't notice. Every time the Scarlet Witch is seen through the reflections in the mirror and the shards of mirror, the music from Evil Dead plays.
That makes sense.
And something's pretty obvious. The Darkhold book is basically the Necronomicon.
Yeah. In here, it's called the Book of the Damned. In the Evil Dead, it's the Book of the Dead, and they both have the same type of plot device where you have to get that book because it's gonna it's the key to everything. It's the key to changing so many things, and it shows you Sam Raimi loves his creepy little books.
Yeah, and you have the reanimated corpses. You have hordes of demons, an invisible force that blows leaves around as it possesses someone. The mirror/water effect, that's in a lot of Sam Raimi stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When Doctor Strange and America Chavez drink the spiked tea and the scenes where the screen bends out of shape.
Oh, yeah.
Straight from Evil Dead. And I believe that was all the Evil Dead nods.
Also, Sam Raimi's cameo, or he plays Pizza Papa.
Yeah.
He makes those pizza balls. When Doctor Strange puts a spell on him where he keeps punching himself, that is a straight up Evil Dead gag where he keeps punching himself over and over. I'm like, the only thing that's missing is him grabbing like a chainsaw to cut his hand off for attacking him. But it's such an obvious Evil Dead nod. And on top of that, I actually think the plot of this movie would be seems like it could have been a plot for the Ash versus Evil Dead television series. Any season of that, this would have fit in perfectly as a season of Ash versus Evil Dead. The story and the adventure that he goes on here, straight out, it just feels like almost like he's initiating Marvel audience into like the Evil Dead without a lot of the audience realizing that they're getting kind of an Evil Dead formula film. And I kind of love that because look, a lot of people who see these movies don't watch horror movies, so this is probably for a lot of fans or a lot of Marvel fans, this is probably their first real horror movie or an exposure to horror. So hopefully that can introduce them into a different style of filmmaking. And because look, Sam Raimi is all over this movie. This movie does not have the generic cut and paste style that I really upsets me about even the best Marvel movies, is that they still have, even when the storytelling and the acting is good and it's compelling, you're just like, damn, could they ever let a filmmaker ever like put their stamp on it? It doesn't happen often. I mean, James Gunn did it with Guardians of the Galaxy. I think Taika Waititi did it with Thor Ragnarok.
Yeah.
So it's rare when you get those filmmakers who can actually take that world and make it their own. And I hope that after this, they allow the filmmakers to become a bigger voice in their movies than they have in the past.
It doesn't, and a lot of the Marvel movies, like they snatch up these the indie directors or smaller directors, really talented directors, and then they have to kind of make their style fit the MCU style. But I think this one was the other way around. I think this was a Sam Raimi movie that he put MCU elements into.
Yeah, whereas something like The Eternals, which they hired Chloe Zhao, the director of Nomadland, and you see a little bit peaks of something a little bit more ambitious peeking through in that movie. But at the end of the day, they still made an Oscar-winning director conform to the MCU formula more than the other way around.
Yeah.
And it's stuff like that I think is a shame to get those artists and not let them do what they want to do.
There's one more interesting thing I found about this. With all the superhero movies coming out and a lot of them rehashing old superhero movies and everything, I thought it was interesting to point out that this Doctor Strange was released almost exactly on the 20th anniversary of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. It was almost exactly on the 14th anniversary of the first Iron Man, the 11th anniversary of Thor, and almost exactly 10 years after the first Avengers. Thought that was kind of interesting. These are,
You've been going on that long. That's kind of
I know.
like when you
I did,
stop and think about that. That's kind of mind blowing.
yeah.
I mean, it is impressive. I can't say that it's not impressive. Like even when the movies don't always work, it's kind of impressive that they've been able to sustain a successful one universe this long with a wide array and a variety of different characters and series and movies. That's no small feat. Despite my complaints, and I have plenty of complaints, trust me, I have plenty of complaints about this universe. I can't deny that is kind of impressive.
And the market is way saturated and almost to the point where I'm not even interested in half the superhero movies that come out. But that almost makes it a more interesting ride to see what happens next, what they're going to do with something that's people are losing interest on.
I have to say this is interesting, and I bet you didn't think about this. We obviously, this is a horror podcast, and occasionally we'll discuss other things here, like as they're relevant. This is the first year where every major superhero release has been appropriate to discuss on this podcast.
Oh yeah,
We've
I
never
realize that.
we covered the Batman, Morbius, and now Doctor Strange. I don't think we've ever covered that many superheroes and movies in a row because it's not really relevant to what we talk about or what we discuss or what we do. But I find it very interesting that this year the three major superhero movies all work in terms of discussing them on a horror podcast.
But they didn't all work.
I mean, I didn't say that they didn't all work. Obviously, there's one that sticks out like a sore thumb, two fantastic movies, and one that's just like a sore thumb. But
yeah,
you get what I'm saying. No,
yeah.
won't work. Yeah.
So that's it for our discussion on. Unless you had anything else to say about Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness.
One last scene. I like the last scene in the movie. It's so Sam Raimi, where everything looks happy. Doctor Strange is triumphant, and he's walking into the middle of the street in New York. Then he falls to his knees, starts screaming. Then you see the third eye open up on his head. Again, I could have told it that would have been right at home in any Evil Dead movie at the end after Ash triumphs for him to just fall in the middle of the street and then have a third eye open up on his head. Something weird and grotesque. So Sam Raimi. This movie is so Sam Raimi, and I think that's what I dug the most about it.
And what's great about that is not only is it so Sam Raimi, it's from the comics. So
Yeah,
we get to see something from the comics, but it's so Sam Raimi. It's so cool. That takes us into another actually surprisingly good comic book horror movie, Constantine from 2005. This one on IMDb is classified as action, fantasy, horror, and mystery.
I think it could fall into all categories.
Yeah, and this one is half the budget of Doctor Strange, and over 10 years ago. So it was $100 million budget. Directed by Francis Lawrence. Francis Lawrence, this director, for his first 10 years, did almost a bunch of big music videos. Mm-hmm. And then after Constantine, he went on to do I Am Legend, which I love that movie, and he did the Hunger Games movies. The writers of Constantine are Kevin Broadbent. He did a Glimmer Man, that really silly movie with Steven Seagal. And Mindhunters, which is a not that great Christian Slater movie. So that might explain some of the...
I thought you would say David Fincher's Mindhunter is not that great.
Oh, no.
It'd be like Michael.
No.
Okay.
Mindhunter is plural, the Christian Slater one.
Cool. I just had to clarify.
So that might explain some of the script problems in this, because I think that's the main problem with Constantine. There's a few problems with the script. But it's based on the Vertigo/DC comic Hellblazer by Jamie Delano and Garth Ennis. It stars Keanu Reeves. He was in Devil's Advocate and Dracula as Constantine. And that reminds me that this opens up the argument where Keanu Reeves was in two movies with phenomenal performances by a devil character, which was Al Pacino in Devil's Advocate. And then...
Peter Stormare.
Oh, yeah, it's... Peter Stormare, I found out. I looked it up, and the T is actually silent. Like, that's a weird one. Peter Stormer.
Okay, I'm gonna be honest with you. Every person I've ever discussed that actor with in real life has called him Peter Stormare. So this
Yeah.
is everything news to me. I'm kind of shocked right now.
Yeah,
Peter
I
Stormare?
I had to look it up. It's Peter Stormer.
Interesting. I'm pretty
And
sure
then
he's used to his name being mispronounced. Then.
yeah, and we might have to talk about that on on another podcast, like the best devil characters in movies, because that warrants a whole discussion. Which one was better, Al Pacino in the much larger part?
He makes a big impression in this movie on one
He
scene.
does.
Yeah.
So it's Keanu Reeves, and then Rachel Weisz, looking beautiful in this one as Angel Dodson.
Mm-hmm.
Digimon Hoinisu, he plays Midnight. He was in Deep Rising and Blood Diamond with Leonardo DiCaprio. And if you get a chance, check out Renegade. This guy that played Midnight was in Renegade. It's an obscure, like surreal type of Western with Juliette Lewis from the early 2000s. If you want to check that out.
Mm-hmm.
This one had Shia LaBeouf as Chaz. Pruitt Taylor Vance, the big guy from Devil's Candy, as Father Hennessy. Gavin Rossdale from Bush as the cheesy-ass Balthazar. Tilda Swinton in an excellent performance as Gabriel, the Archangel. And, of course, as we mentioned, Peter Stormer as Satan. So the synopsis is, supernatural exorcist and demonologist John Constantine helps a policewoman prove that her twin sister's death was not a suicide, but is linked to a horde of demons trying to pass over into our world. One thing I noticed about this movie, excellent cinematography in this movie. Philippe Roselot, he's a French cinematographer. Before Constantine, he did A River Runs Through It, Interview with a Vampire, Remember the Titans, and then after Constantine, he wanted to do Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Sherlock Holmes, The Nice Guys, and Fantastic Beasts. So a very accomplished cinematographer on this one. And what fascinated me most about this one is the special makeup effects and the visual effects. Special effects were done by the great Stan Winston and himself and his studio. They did, if you're not familiar with Stan Winston, you've been hiding under a rock. He did Interview with a Vampire, The Thing, The Hand, it's my first horror film with Michael Caine, Edward Scissorhands, Terminator 2, Monster Squad, Predator, Aliens, and of course, End of Days with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which I thought was very reminiscent of Constantine. And then the visual effects, which shows like easily like 3/4 of the visual effects in this movie are very impressive and ahead of their time. It only looks cheap on a couple parts. It's just because they went balls out and went with a full rendering of what hell looks like. I think that's why I think they were just overly ambitious. It's the only time that you see any kind of cheesiness in the effects. So the effects
but
were
it's also a product of its time too.
true.
I think even if it might have been considered, and I'm not sure it ever was, but if it was considered good in 2005, most special effects from 2005 look questionable now.
Yeah, but for what they are, they're really good. They were done by Tippett, the Tippett Studio, which was founded by the great Phil Tippett. Phil Tippett did Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park, Starship Troopers, but he himself wasn't a part of this. It was his studio, but his studio did movies like Drag Me to Hell, The Immortals. If you haven't seen Immortals, you have to check out the visuals in that one. It's amazing. The Ring, Cloverfield, Blade, and Hellboy. So they're very reminiscent of Hellboy too. Constantine was. But the first opening scene grabbed me with this one, where it shows a couple Mexican guys kind of sifting through this decaying kind of city, and one of them finds the Spear of Destiny, like this big dagger, and then he finds the Spear of Destiny and kind of walks aimlessly into the street, and a car just hits him and it just kind of wipes out the car. Very impressive effects right there. It looked totally real, where he's just standing in the middle of the car and the whole wreckage of the car is all around him, smoking and everything. And then a little later they show him kind of walking through a field, and he walks through a field of cows and all the cows drop dead next to him. So
Yeah,
These scenes like this
he-
almost made it seem like it was going to be a better movie than it was.
actually, I was about to say that. I hadn't seen this movie since I saw it in theaters, and I remembered a lot about it. And I only had a vague memory of that scene, and it came back. And I remember thinking, I was like, oh, this movie's going to be better than I remember it being, just based on that opening scene. I ended up enjoying it, but the opening scene hints at a better movie that comes after. By the way, he doesn't get hit by a car; the car gets hit by him.
Yeah. But
But
I love
yeah,
it. All that.
there's like the first 20 minutes, it seems like it's going to be a better movie than it ends up becoming.
Yeah, and that was a pretty impressive effect for it to look so real, and
Mm.
it was so seamless. I was looking close at it, studying it. Wow, it was very impressive. And even the one, even the scene following that was less impressive, but I still think it was keeping up that momentum when Keanu Reeves goes to visit that possessed girl,
I like that scene. Yeah.
and the demon is kind of pushing. The visual effects have the demon pushing out of her throat, and he's trying to kind of stuffing it back inside the girl. And then he has the family hold a mirror above him, and then you see the demon in the mirror. So the demon gets trapped in the mirror, and he throws it out the window. I thought that whole sequence was really entertaining, really well done.
Hmm.
And that's where I was on board with Keanu Reeves there too, because his acting was good in that one. And later on in the movie, you see that his acting kind of gets woo.
Look, I like Keanu Reeves a lot, and I don't like singling him out. For one, he's like one of the nicest and sweetest celebrities out there. So that has to be given, that has to be acknowledged. But and he's gotten better. I mean, he's really good in the John Wick movies, obviously, but I've noticed, especially a lot in the past, a lot of Keanu Reeves roles, he sticks out in his movies in a way that is not beneficial to the movie. And I feel like he was cast in this movie because he's Keanu Reeves, because he's a big star. And I think the more the performance goes along, like you kind of like just accept it, and it grows on you. And I ended up liking him in the role. However, this is supposed to be like almost like a hard-bitten, hard-drinking, cynical, smoking, a noirish detective. Those really bitter noir detectives. I think that there are better actors at that time. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there are better actors who could portray the hard-bitten noir detectives a lot better than Keanu Reeves in terms of like you think of these characters more like Mickey Rourke in Sin City. When I think of those noir detectives, I think mostly of like the narration that they always have. Not that there's narration in this movie, but I think a good noir detective has to have like a voice that's a little bit gritty, a little bit weary, and it sounds like it's been through a lot. And I could see Keanu Reeves straining to make that effect naturally, being a hard ass. And like, I don't always buy every scene where he's supposed to be some hard ass, bitter, cynical detective. I think there are better actors you could have cast in this role. He ends up growing on you, and he's fine, but he doesn't really fit this role very well.
Well,
It's a little bit of a miscast.
he's fascinating to me because sometimes he comes off really good,
Mm-hmm.
and then sometimes he comes off really bad, and sometimes it's in the same scene. He can start off a scene like he's talking, he's very natural, it's coming out right, and all of a sudden he'll just have this delivery where you even see him. I see him act with his face. He has great movements, great facial expressions. He's really feeling what he's saying, and then he opens his mouth and his delivery is weird.
Yeah. And it's just because he's trying to affect that cynical, noirish detective thing. And I don't really think his acting style and his vocals are a good fit for that. You picture like who are actors that are good? Like Josh Brolin, that's like a good choice for that type of, like, you need a certain type of voice, and I think he lacks it. I even think Robert Pattinson has it, and I don't even think he's that type of actor in the Batman, where he's like giving his narration, which is very noirish. And I think that's what's missing from the role, is a character with a better vocal inflection. These types of characters require a very specific type of actor, and not everybody can deliver that grittiness. And I think that's the biggest flaw with it, is I could see Keanu Reeves affecting that instead of falling into it or ever becoming it. And he's
And
fine, and I accept it in the movie, and I end up enjoying it. But there has to have been better actors who could have pulled this role off a lot stronger than Keanu Reeves.
and I started to think maybe maybe he's an actor where you can't challenge him too much. Like he's going to shine if you put him in a role that's perfect for his personality. But if he has to be challenged in any way, I think that's where he goes off the rails. But he was in this really impressive, well, I think it's a really impressive movie with Winona Ryder. It's like Wedding Date or something like that, where it's just him and Winona Ryder at somebody's wedding. Like they're the outcasts. They're the ones that were invited because they're the ones that never get married, and they're kind of perpetually single. But it's heavy dialogue where he has to be this real person and talking through the whole damn movie, and holy shit, he was good. So I can't explain what makes this guy so great, because sometimes he's great and sometimes he's whoa.
You got the Matrix, you got the John Wick movies, but this is a role to me that reminds me a little bit of Dracula. He sticks out like a sore thumb in Dracula too. He doesn't, I don't know, his style of acting does not fit because it's too specific. I would even, and look, and I know this is going to break controversy, but even in a movie like Point Break, which is such a good movie, his performance sometimes has me like really questioning things. And I think it becomes more obvious in that movie when he shares scenes with Patrick Swayze, who has such a natural charisma and ease that you could see Keanu Reeves straining. And I think you're right. Whenever he has to play something that's outside of his range, you could see him straining for his effect. And I think it's here. And he ends up selling the role good enough for the movie. But I just can't help but feel that there were actors who were more suited to this that were passed over because Keanu Reeves is a bigger star. And The Matrix wasn't that far in the past either when this movie was made.
Well, much like you said with Patrick Swayze, where in Point Break, you don't really realize his shortcomings until he's in a scene with Patrick Swayze, because Patrick Swayze's so ultra natural.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the same thing happened here. I think through much of the first act of the movie, I was feeling him. He's got the right look. He's got the right presence. He wasn't quite the hard edge that they wanted him to come off to be, but I seen that as him having a little more vulnerability than they intended. But he gets in the scene where he meets Gabriel for the first time, and he's talking to Tilda Swinton. I don't know if he had to have been nervous. I would have been nervous in a scene with Tilda Swinton if you're an actor like him without great chops. But I think he got overly nervous because he was just awful in that scene. I didn't believe anything that he said. It was just, that's when his acting went off the rails there, when he was in the scene with her.
Yeah. And I got to say, Tilda Swinton and Peter Stormare.
Yeah, Stormer.
Peter Stormare. I thought that they had much bigger roles in this movie than they did, because I've only saw this movie one time at the movie theater. I went to go see this with my dad in 2005. And I remember very vividly Peter Stormare and Gabriel, the angel, Tilda Swinton, that when I was watching this movie, I was waiting for them to show up again, and I forgot that he doesn't even show up until the last scene, but they make such strong impressions that all these years later, it was like 16, 17 years ago since I'd last seen this movie, and I built up their roles in my head to be a lot larger than they actually were. That's how good their acting is, and that's how strong their presence is in this movie. That I feel like that's what I think those are the two most memorable aspects of it, is two roles that are very crucial to the story, but small in terms of screen time.
And Tilda has just two scenes that aren't that long, and then Peter Stormare has one scene.
And they're phenomenal.
And that's it.
They're phenomenal in those scenes.
And both of them are just as memorable as any other actor that fills the screen time in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Just equally as memorable.
LaBeouf was in this movie. Because I think when I first saw this movie, I didn't really watch Even Stevens growing up, so I never paid much. I didn't really notice Shia LaBeouf until Disturbia, which came a couple years later. So I think when this movie came out, I didn't even know who Shia LaBeouf was at the time. I forgot that he was even in this movie.
Yeah, he was so squirrely looking.
Yeah, little Shia.
But he was cast to be himself. He was just Shia LaBeouf in this movie.
I think he fits the role.
He does.
I don't think there's any problem with his performance. But it's just things like that where I enjoy this movie, and it's good and it's enjoyable, but it has some moments that are wonky, and I could see this movie having potential where I feel like this could have been a better movie than it ended up being. What it ends up being is entertaining and worth a watch, but I think this could have been something a lot more stand out if they had just changed some of the elements or if they did something different. I feel like Peter Stormare should have played a bigger role just because he brings so much life to this movie. A little bit more of Tilda Swinton. Yeah, and again with Keanu Reeves, I don't know what to say because I don't know. I mean, there's a part of me that just feels like they should have just recast his character or recast the actor. But he ends up growing on you. It's just, I think that's the frustrating thing about this movie. You see a good movie, and there's like a great movie in there somewhere.
Yeah.
It's not here.
Well, I was kind of comparing his acting to the visual effects, where it looks great, it's often serviceable, sometimes amazing, but it still has moments of being really bad and cheesy.
Yeah, so he could be really strong in one scene and then not so strong in the next scene.
But there's two scenes in this I like that were reminiscent of the next movie we're going to discuss. There's two very similar scenes in this one and The Crow. First one is your main character going into a club, and it's very music video club atmosphere, where he goes to see Midnight, played by Digimon Honsu. And I love this scene, but just because of the atmosphere of it, the filming of it. This is when I first started to notice the excellent lighting and the shot selection and the strategic close-ups and everything. So this is where I really started noticing the good cinematography. And then just the whole feeling of, there's a song, Perfect Circle. This doesn't, by the way, this doesn't have hardly any music in it. It's almost all score. And you would think since it was a music video director, it would have a lot of music in it, but it doesn't. But the little bit that it does, when Constantine's walking through this cool looking club with all this great lighting, and then A Perfect Circle's passive starts playing. I thought that was really cool. But then the scene starts playing out, and you're feeling the dynamics between Constantine and Midnight, and then Balthazar comes in. I thought that was one of the cheesiest. I mean, you're talking about Keanu Reeves being bad. Gavin Rossdale from Bush, holy hell, when he's played a snarky British guy, like getting up in Keanu Reeves' face, I was embarrassed for him too. I'm like, sit down, dude. It was not good. I didn't believe anything that dude said. But the other scene that was reminiscent of The Crow was they both have a scene where a cat kind of where the main character gets a hold of a cat, and then the cat brings about visions.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the whole scene where Keanu Reeves sits in a chair and he puts his feet in the water and he holds the cat and he looks into the cat's eyes. So, and his feet starts boiling and he's transported to hell. And this is a part where it was really cool visuals, but this is where it started to look a little cheap because they went so fantastical with the depiction of hell, because it originally wasn't supposed to be that elaborate.
Mm-hmm.
It was supposed to be a black void with things coming out of the shadows, but they ended up making it fully rendered.
That sounds like a much better idea than what they ended up with.
Yeah, I think if they were going for more quality rather than spectacle, I think they might have left it like that, but I think they were really going with spectacle, especially since they had such an amazing effects house on board the movie. And they don't seem to do that with big budget movies anymore. Really getting, like, instead of getting these really high quality effects houses with a history of great work, they get these like big teams of hundreds of visual artists. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's no central vision to it. It's just like everybody trying to render it in the computer as realistic as possible, instead of having a creative visual idea of how it's all supposed to be. And I think you could really tell in this.
Yeah.
And then that I love the scene with Father Hennessy, Pruitt Taylor Vance, when he gets kind of cursed by one of the demons, and he starts drinking himself to death. So you see him go through a liquor store, and he's breaking all the liquor bottles open. He's kind of pouring it into his throat, and it's disappearing as it's going down. I thought that was a really good visual effect. And then soon after that scene, you see the Vermin Man. I love the Vermin Man. Mm-hmm. It's this creature that attacks. He's made up of snakes, rats, crabs, and 20 different types of insects. and it's all CGI, but there's something organic about it. Before I knew how it was rendered and everything, I could tell very much that it was CGI, but it was something very organic, something I could reach out and touch about it. And it's because real bugs, real worms, and snakes were all molded and cast in clay.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Tippett studio kind of done cyber scans of it, and ultra realistic pictures and printed it out in the computer
Mm-hmm.
based on the real visuals. And that's a lot of what makes this the visuals good in this, even though they went way over the top.
Mm-hmm.
The other great visual one was the Balthazar beatdown. First of all, it's satisfying that Keanu Reeves is beating the shit out of Gavin Rossdale with no problem at all. But it's so satisfying. He gets these brass knuckles on his hand, and you can just feel him just crushing his face in when he hits him.
Mm-hmm.
But this was achieved. I thought this one looked ultra realistic too, him laying there, but you can kind of tell it was CG too. And this looked very organic. So this was done. It was Stan Winston 2-stage silicone prosthetic makeup. Stage 1 was torn skin revealing underlying demon flesh. Stage 2 was more extensive makeup with overlapping teeth and that shriveled up eye. And then they made Stan Winston's team put together a full-size articulated puppet. And then the Tippett studio used photos and cyber scans to make it digital.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why that part looks so impressive.
Yeah.
Another great visual effect, Rachel Weisz. You think Constantine's kind of saved her, and then she gets snatched out of his hands. It's kind of a little bit of a shocking moment, and she gets pulled all the way through a building by a demon. And I thought it was pretty realistic looking. And believe it or not, you can't tell. I defy you to be able to tell watching this movie back. That is a miniature. It's a little miniature doll that they made of Rachel Weisz, and they pulled her through a little miniature office building.
Oh, I couldn't tell.
It was so cool. But stuff like that really makes this film stand out. And then the part where he turns the sprinklers full of holy water on all the demons, and they're kind of all disintegrating under it. And this, I didn't even realize she was in here. Michelle Monaghan all of a sudden is right there on the screen. I'm like, what the hell? I didn't know Michelle Monaghan was in this one. She was the one from True Detective and Mission Impossible. But on that one too, they took Michelle Monaghan. She actually had a bigger part. That's why she was in this movie, and you only see her you see her on screen and she screams and dissolves.
Mm-hmm.
So with her, they sculpted her entire body from cyber scans and made a plastic replica of her look just like her. They hollowed it out, all the plaster, and filled it with black goo, and then dropped it onto the stage for it to explode. So that's how they got that effect.
Pretty cool effects.
Yeah. But some of the editing was weird in this. Like, there was the awesome scene where there's a horde of unseen demons are coming after Constantine and the Rachel Weisz character. And then he pulls out this cloth and he burns it, and then the flash from it burning kind of lights up all the demons, and they all start exploding. And you're watching the movie, how the hell did that happen? What is that? And then apparently there's a scene that was cut of the guy Beeman that he goes to get his supplies, that he explains that the cloth is a shroud of Moses. So that's why it destroyed. But there's little scenes cut like that where they should have left it in there. And then I think I mentioned to you before, I know that Shia LaBeouf's character kind of mentioned that he knew more than he did, like throughout, when he's kept trying to get Constantine to let him help. And then all of a sudden he was an expert on everything. I thought it was kind of weird where he was talking to Midnight and they didn't pay any attention to him, and Constantine wants him to stay in the car. And all of a sudden he shows up and they give him all this respect, like he knows more. I feel like there was something cut in there too. It was kind of weird. maybe
I think
for
it's just
time.
more surprised. I think it's more meant to be like kind of Midnight's a little surprised that this little kid, or I think he's just impressed with the kid's spunkiness and knowledge at his age level, that he had the balls to come up in here, and that when he recites some of the information that he recites, it's accurate. And when he throws out an idea of how to approach it, it's actually a pretty decent idea. It's not a bad idea. So I think in just that moment, he was just really impressed with this kid. Probably impressed for his age. That's
Yeah.
what I get off of it.
So like, oh, this kid's not such a dumb little whippersnapper after all.
Yeah, he knows some of what he speaks about.
So that brings me to my personal favorite scene of the whole movie, where it's the whole climax, and you see Gabriel. Gabriel comes in, and every time Gabriel's on screen, I loved it. So that was already cool. And then he gets Angela down and starts to stab her and starts to cut the devil's son out of her, and then everything freezes. And then Peter Stormare kind of lowers himself down. And by the way, Peter Stormare designed his own costume. He's in
Really?
this all off-white linen suit with tar dripping from his feet. And the producer and the director additionally wanted leather trousers. They wanted him to be bare-chested with a dog collar and spikes, with tattoo all over his face and chest. That would have been silly.
That would have been really try hard. That would have been like desperately trying to scare. And the thing is, in my experience, especially, depictions of the devil are usually creepier when he comes across more as a well-dressed, like when he has more of that well-dressed, classy look, than when you try to make him scary. When you try to make the devil scary, it's not scary. But when you put the devil in a clean off-white suit, I think that's a little bit more intimidating.
Yeah. And I loved how it's I can't quite put my finger on what's so great about his performance. Like it's understated in a way, but it's also very effective. He has a touch of a southern accent, and he has this really weird delivery that I've never seen. I've never seen him act like this at all anywhere else in any movie.
I think what he's going for is something that you can't place. It's a touch of a southern accent, but not quite. Where he actually created in one scene a portrait of the devil as somebody who is completely unprecedented. It reminds me a little bit of like Anton Chigurh in No Country for Old Men. That's a character who doesn't have like an accent that's identifiable. When you try to like listen to how he speaks, or like that seems so generic. It seems like it could come from any part of the country, but no part of the country at the same time. It's the same thing as like, it sounds like a southern accent, but not a southern accent I've ever heard before. It's that ability to create a character, especially when you play somebody that evil or you're playing Satan. You have to kind of find an angle in where you have to make it feel like the character you're playing, there's no precedent for it. There's no other version of evil that exists that's like it. It's its own unique thing. And he makes such a strong impression that I spent the entire time waiting for him to show up. That's what I was most looking forward to in the movie, because my memory of it from seeing it at age 15, a lot of it came down to the devil. A lot of what I remembered, it was just that scene. And I thought there was more of it spread out. So I think over an hour into the movie, it kind of clicked with me. I was like, I don't think he's going to come in until that's a scene you remember. I think that's really it. He's not in this movie until until the end.
Yeah,
He steals the movie from everybody.
it's an hour and 40 minutes in. So that's that's pretty much the full length of a movie before he even makes an appearance. And then all of a sudden he's in the movie, and he's all you can see and all you can think about.
Yeah.
He
And
even dominates Tilda Swinton's presence.
and she was awesome in it. By the way, I think you were right to be confused. I think they were trying to do something androgynous with Gabriel, from what I understand, unplaceable. So when you say man or woman, it's supposed to be like either or none or both, or it's hard to say, but it was meant to be an androgynous take. Obviously, casting Tilda Swinton because Gabriel is supposed to be a male, I think. So I kind of like that. I kind of like that aspect.
Yeah. So that was a great scene, a great cinematic Satan. A quick fact about Constantine I thought was pretty interesting. Constantine was created by Alan Moore, who also created The Watchmen and The Killing Joke. He had such a negative experience with From Hell, which I hate From Hell. That's an awful, awful movie. So he had a negative experience with From Hell and A League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. It was such a bad experience that he rejected all money and credit from Hollywood from then on out for any adaptation, and gave all the money to the artist who drew him.
Yeah, I noticed like in every like he's not credited on the Watchmen movie or the series or the Batman Killing Joke animated movie. He doesn't want any credit for anything that's adapted, and his conclusion is that the reason they're bad is because these are not meant to be films. They were stories that were designed for a specific medium, and that's why I put it there. If I wanted to make a movie, I would have made a movie, but I made a comic book. So I think he's just done with Hollywood, and he won't even watch any adaptations of his work anymore. He has no interest in it. And it is kind of interesting that you see all these iconic creations of his, but whenever they're adapted, you don't see any sign of his name appearing anywhere.
So that brings us to The Crow from 1994. Now, this is my personal favorite comic book horror adaptation. On IMDb, this one is classified as action, crime, drama, fantasy, horror, thriller. And it's all of them. And this one, quite a bit less budget than the other two. This one's $23 million budget. And to me, the other two before this were clearly higher budget. But to me, as far as effectiveness and spectacle and just an overall richly like nuanced good time, I think this was just as effective as the other two as far as being a big budget spectacle, but so much more grounded and gothic. I just love this movie. It's directed by Alex Proyas, who went on to direct A Dark City, I, Robot, Knowing with Nicolas Cage, and Gods of Egypt. The writers are David J. Shaw, who did Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 and a severely underrated and underseen slasher, The Hills Run Red. So I highly recommend that one if you get a chance to check it out. And John Shirley, who wrote for the Spawn series and also did a couple episodes of Batman Beyond. And it's based on the comic book series by James O'Barr.
That doesn't surprise me. A lot of the vibe and atmosphere reminds me of the Spawn animated series.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Not the Spawn movie, but the animated series. Yeah, I totally get that off of this.
Like a little bit of a noir feel, a little bit of a gothic feel.
Ugly noir feel, because I feel like this, like in Spawn, is like, I mean, noir. Not that it's it's a fun genre, but it's not supposed to be pleasant in the first place. But I feel like these two movies are even uglier than what your average. I mean, the movie and that show are like depict those elements uglier than your average noir does.
Yeah. And this one starred the great Brandon Lee as Eric Draven, Rochelle Davis as Sarah, Ernie Hudson from the Ghostbusters as Albrecht, Michael Wincott as Top Dollar, the main villain, crime lord, David Patrick Kelly from the Warriors is T-Bird, he's the car buff, Lawrence Mason is Tintin, the knife thrower, Angel David is Skank, love Skank, he's a super loyal dirtbag, Michael Massey as Fun Boy, the addict, Bei Ling as Micah, the main villain's weird half-sister, the great Tony Todd, Candyman himself, as Grange, and John Polito as Gideon. I thought he was a really good supporting character in this one, that blonde fat dude that owns the pawn shop. Mm-hmm. The synopsis is, guitarist Eric Draven is brought back to life by a crow a year after he and his fiancée are murdered. The crow guides him through the land of the living and leads him to his killers. First of all, the music. Music by Graham Revel. Before, if you're not familiar with Graham Revel, before The Crow, he did Child's Play 2, Psycho 4, Hand That Rocks the Cradle. And then after The Crow, he went on to do Strange Days, great music in that one. From Dusk Till Dawn, Bride of Chucky, Idle Hands, Pitch Black, and The Ruins, among other things. So he's been seeped into horror for quite a long time. And I absolutely love the camera work in this. The director of photography was Darius Wolski. Before The Crow, he did mostly videos, and he did Romeo's Bleeding. That's another little noir a little noir drama with
Mhm.
Gary Oldman and Juliette Lewis, if you get a chance to check that out. And after The Crow, he went on to do Crimson Tide, Dark City, of course, Alex Proyas's other movie, Pirates of the Caribbean, Sweeney Todd, Prometheus, The Martian, and recently House of Gucci, and he's currently filming Napoleon with Joaquin Phoenix. This is another one with great makeup effects. The makeup effects on this one were done by Lance Anderson. He did makeup effects on Serpent and Rainbow, Pets, the original Pet Cemetery, Death Becomes Her. I love the makeup in that one. The Dawn of the Dead remake, James Wan's Dead Silence, and Cabin in the Woods. He worked on the team on Heather Langenkamp's and her husband worked on their team on Cabin in the Woods. And I can't mention The Crow without mentioning the soundtrack. One of the best, if not the best, soundtracks for me for a movie. It has Burn by The Cure, Big Empty by Stone Temple Pilots, Dead Souls. It's a Joy Division cover by Nine Inch Nails, one of my favorite cover songs. Milk Toast by Helmet. You got a song by Rollins Band, by Jesus and Mary Chain, Rage Against the Machine, Violent Femmes. So just a phenomenal soundtrack.
It's very indicative of the era it came out to.
Definitely,
Like, you
not
can really plug it into that time and place.
and not all the big popular ones of that time either. Like the ones I still love to this day, like Helmet and The Cure. Like really good ones.
The Cure's still pretty popular now.
Yeah, that's true.
They're pretty iconic.
Yeah, a lot of the kids are into the more emo stuff these days. They're going back and listening to The Cure and Echo and the Bunnymen and all that.
I'm convinced that the movies of Tim Burton have kept the popularity of The Cure up for a long time.
That's true. Huh?
Yeah.
So right away, this movie opens up, and for me, it's instantly iconic. It opens up October 30th, Devil's Night. You see this stark black city. It's like a darker, filthier version of Detroit. It's Devil's Night. You got the stark black city, and it's glowing orange from the flames. And then you have the Sarah character narrating the Crow legend as the camera kind of floats through the city, and then it floats into that famous round loft window that Eric Draven stayed in before he died. It kind of floats into that window into the crime scene, and you see Ernie Hudson in there conducting the investigation and shit. But this leads to, for me, an instantly iconic scene that I remember when I first saw it, because you go through this whole, it's very stylish, this whole crime scene where they kind of float through the city with the crow and everything, and it's very stylish. And then you get to Sarah coming in, and she starts talking to Albrecht, and then she comes to the realization that her friend Shelley is going to die.
Mm-hmm.
So he starts comforting her, and there's that amazing shot that I love so much. It gets me every time when it's kind of, the camera kind of comes back from the crime scene, and they're standing out there in the middle of the cop cars, and you see the city around them and the lights from the cop cars and stuff, and he just bending down comforting her. I just love the way it's framed. I love the way it's lit. It kind of it's kind of poetic, and you see little flourishes of poetry like that throughout the whole movie, which I love. That it's not afraid to be poetic like that, and I think it works every time. And then as we follow Albrecht, it's a perfect character to follow in a movie like this, because for me, Albrecht grounds the film, and then as you see him in his life dealing with his boss, and then he connects with Sarah, and then she's the emotional core of the film.
I mean,
So
Albrecht is the person who we view the story through, I think, because it's the surroundings of this movie are so they're obviously based on very real world concepts, but it's so exaggerated that it becomes unrecognizable to us that he's the most, I wouldn't say human is the right word, but the most human in the sense that we recognize human beings. He is a regular person that could fit in any kind of film. where a lot of the characters in this movie come from a very heightened theatrical place, which makes sense because they're trying to meld with the settings of the movie, which is a very heightened version of reality. He's like the grounded center of it all.
Yeah, and even even the little girl is kind of heightened, like for the movie. She's like extra innocent, extra doughy, you know. She's kind of the emotional core of the film, but she's not quite as grounded. She's almost like a fantasy character because she narrates the whole crow legend and all that.
I actually don't think she's that fantasy if you take out her narration. I think she's a pretty realistic character if you look at it. If you take away the narration, that's where I think her most fantastical things about her personality come about. But she seems more like one of those latchkey kids who had to learn a lot earlier in life. Very mature for her age, knows how to get around, isn't very naive. Where I feel like some of the more fairy tale elements of her character are communicated more through her narration style than it is her other parts. The other parts, I feel she's more relatable or more human.
And she's very comfortable hanging out with adults and wisecracking with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, hold the onions. They make you fart big time.
Yeah.
But another scene that really stands out for me is when Eric wanders into his apartment. That whole sequence, I feel it. It looks cool. He picks up the cat. This is another one that reminded me of the Constantine one. So he comes into his apartment and then he picks up his cat that he had when he was alive, and he kind of looks into its eyes, and then the cat, because he starts connecting with what the cat saw, because he's able to do that throughout the whole movie. Like, he's able to touch somebody or a living thing, and then he sees everything that it's seen. So he picks up the cat and he has these visions of his girlfriend being attacked. And then I love the part where he runs to the broken window and he swings out of the window almost where his feet go up toward the roof. And then you get this shot from above of him swinging back into the window, and he kind of lands all cool. Mm-hmm. So that's another part that's like cool and stylized and it looks cool, but it's also heart-wrenching. Mm-hmm. Because it shows those very, graphic scenes of them being attacked, and you feel in his reactions to everything, you feel his pain. Mm-hmm. You feel his pain in his voice, in his grunts, in his movements, just all pain. That's why I think Brandon Lee so fully embraced this character that you can feel every emotion that he's portraying on screen. Mm-hmm. So then you go through this scene, very stylized scene that's also heart-wrenching. And then I love how it cuts to the villains. And it cuts to the villains just to show how crazy they are, how drugged out they are, how they're a bunch of dirt bags. And then as you see these dirt bags that he's going to take his revenge on, you kind of cut back to Eric Draven putting his makeup on, and then another perfect song selection. The Cure starts up while he's putting his makeup on.
Okay, I didn't notice. Don't you think that the opening of the Batman is heavily influenced by this?
Oh yeah,
a very similar scene where it's not gothic music, but they make that part of Robert Pattinson's Batman where he puts on the eye makeup around there, and you see him putting the makeup on in his hair. I see heavy influence on that, especially in the fact that they're both Gotham City and here Detroit. They're both dirty, ugly cities, and it's always raining in both movies. And the main character has an emo goth vibe, so I saw heavy influence on the Batman when I was watching it with him putting the makeup on.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I like the Batman so much. And then that scene ends with the crow landing on his shoulder. He puts his whole outfit and everything on, and just the shot selection just makes it perfectly effective there for me. And then it ends with him walking toward the window, and then you see kind of his face light up, and he's got the full makeup on. Mm-hmm. It's so perfect for me.
So the way that I would describe the city, and it's such a cliche to say this because this is influenced on a lot of things, is like Blade Runner-esque. But I think the biggest difference is this is reminds me of the universe of Blade Runner, where the technology never really advanced or got that incredible, but the decay and the urban decay advanced while the technology stood kind of stood stagnant for a long time. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
has all the dirty elements of Blade Runner, but none of the fantastic technology that makes it futuristic. So it takes like the worst elements of it and kind of pumps it up to a more exaggerated kind of view and gives you a very noirish, gothic, noir/gothic kind of feel to it.
Yeah, and how everything's like almost overly stylized and gothic. It's almost surprising to see how grounded it feels throughout, and it never feels. Uh, some people might say it's dated, but to me, it doesn't feel dated when I watch it. It feels like I'm in this world that was created in the '90s, but
Mhm.
I'm still immersed in this very visual, very different world.
It is. But I think the reason people say it's dated is because it's very 90s. It is very
Yeah,
much of its era, and you don't really see and to be honest, you don't really see these kinds of films being made anymore. I think that's another thing. Like, especially when you think about the early 90s with Tim Burton movies, and even later 90s, something like Spawn, which is obviously not as good of a movie as this is. But there was like a popularity in the 90s of like the very gothic kind of look and feel and the industrial soundtracks and the kind of like that metal influence, that gothic influence, and it was such a common thing, and you don't really see it that much in movies anymore. You only see hints of it here and there, whereas in the 90s that it completely flourished. You see it in fashion. I mean, I think there's a case to be made that Hot Topic would not exist without the Crow and Tim Burton movies. Like, I really think
yeah.
like that whole style comes from this very 90s thing. I think the fashions still live on, but as far as people making movies and stuff like this, it just isn't done too often anymore. The closest I could think of is like the Batman, like I said, but even then, that only like uses elements, it only flirts with it. It's not as gothic, it is not as um and I hate saying hot topic because that sounds derisive, and I don't mean it in a negative way, but Hot Topic is very much a product of a certain type of style that was very popular in the 90s.
And to me, this movie is genuinely gothic, has a genuinely gothic style, but
Mhm.
it did influence a lot of things that wanted to be gothic.
Yeah, things that wanted to be gothic, but and I think what makes a lot of this work is I actually think this is really challenging material as an actor because it's so poetic, like you described, that it takes a certain, and this is, and I like the movie quite a bit, and I've actually seen it twice, and I like it more. I do have some problems with it that you're probably not going to agree with, but my thing with this is that I think this type of material takes a very specific type of actor to pull off, because some of the lines like do you know someone named T-Bird? He had a friend who shouldn't have played with knives. That's almost like I wouldn't say Edgar Allan Poe-esque, but there's like a quality where he sounds like he's reading poetry. And with a different type of actor other than Brandon Lee, lines like that could potentially come off cheesy. You need somebody who has like the kind of movie star charisma to sell it. And I think that's what Brandon Lee has. He rises to the occasion of everything that's surrounding him. I think his performance is authentic but not realistic, and I mean that in a good way. He's melding with his surroundings, he's channeling very genuine emotions into something grander and poetic and heightened, and you even see it with the little girl in the movie. And I think that's what makes this movie unique, is that a lot of it requires certain type of performers to really pull off what this movie is going for. I don't think just anybody can act in a movie like The Crow and pull it off. And I can picture so many actors getting it wrong or trying to make the dialogue sound too realistic or something like that. So it's a movie that dances on a knife's edge. And
Yeah.
I think some people might feel it's dated because those elements are not going to work for everybody. The poetic qualities, and it's not afraid to go to that level. But I think Brandon Lee is a big part of what sells it. Another performer could have totally have ruined the movie if they didn't have the charisma, if they didn't have the dedication, or the movie star qualities that Brandon Lee so obviously had.
Yeah, like when he says, "Victims, aren't we all?"
That's a
That would have
really
been
bad line from somebody else, not from
that would
him.
have been a one-liner from anybody else.
Hmm.
It would have come off very like, and "Can't rain all the time."
Hmm.
That 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 whole scene could have come off very melodramatic.
It's very gothic and disaffected in a way where and look, and this is where the parts of the movies that don't work for me come down to the villains. And I wouldn't even say it's the performers. I could tell that it's directed in a certain way, that the villains are supposed to be like this. Where I've noticed, I love Brandon Lee in this movie, and all of the character. Who's the character who plays the mom?
Oh, I don't
Sarah.
have her name.
Look that up really quick. Like,
Yeah, she's on True Romance.
yeah, she's the one who said I would fuck Elvis. They have that
Yeah.
conversation at the beginning. But I kind of feel like a lot of the characters that are on the side of good, all of their performances work for me. They feel like real people. They feel like they're trying really hard. I think is the villains are so greasy and so like overly greasy and so hedonistic that in a way they kind of came across as jokes to me. I think that's what kind of bothers me about the movie, is that I don't really buy any of these people as credible threats to Brandon Lee's The Crow or his Eric Draven in this movie. I think he's like has such charisma and such screen presence that them trying to do this heightened thing, that some of it I don't care for a lot of the villain performances. The one villain performance who I do actually like a lot is Gideon. I think because that actor is really
Yeah.
kind of navigating at navigating this type of acting style. And there's like the scene where one of the villains is like, oh, such pretty eyes, and like some of it is so disaffected, and T-Bird is so overly grimy that he comes across like they escaped from like, and I hate saying this, but I feel like they came from a lesser B movie than this was. I don't think that they kind of rise to the occasion the way that Brandon Lee and some of the good performers do. But I think it's because of the director. And I'm going to give you another example. This is a character who's not a villain. There's Albright and there's Torres. Albright's really good in this movie, and Torres is a superior cop. I don't like his performance. I think it's overly scowly. Yeah, he comes across as like phony to me. And I kind of click with me. That's how this director, that's how Alex Proyas chose to direct all of these villain performances. And Torres is not a villain, but he's supposed to be the lesser cop. And obviously he's not a great cop. I wouldn't call him a villain in the movie. And I think that it's interesting to me that most of all the performances where the good characters seem to work, but anybody who's vaguely villainous comes across as a caricature. And I could see why it might work for some people, but I just don't think that they're worthy threats to Brandon Lee. And I think it's a little more obvious when they have to share screen time with him. When he walks in, they come across as like, so I never believe that they're credible threats to him at any point.
But I kept that in mind while watching it this time. First of all, I always love the villains, and especially the main villain, Top Dollar. Mm-hmm. I've always loved the villains in this, and then when I talked to you, you made me think, I should watch them closer this time to see if I feel the same way as you do. And I actually disagree with you once I really got into watching it and paying close attention to the villains, because you have Top Dollar. He's the intelligent crime lord with an amazing presence, and he feels like a real threat. And he's the only one that ends up being a real threat. So you got him, and then you have Tony Todd, which is Grange.
I actually like Tony Todd too. I think he has a good presence.
That's the real villain. That's the real threat. Mm-hmm. Is Tony Todd? He's smart. He's intimidating. He's got everything that the other villains don't have. And then he has this half sister. She's kind of weird and eccentric, and they have threesomes together, and she's kind of the weird one. So then you get to T-Bird. So the rest of the guys, these guys that actually did the crime, they're his thugs. Mm-hmm. They aren't. They're kind of. You got T-Bird, which is the leader of them. Mm-hmm. He's the smartest out of them, but he's also a wild drug addict, and they show that. So you got him, the wild drug addict, and then you got Tintin, who was, I think, the coolest of the villains. And then you have Skank, which was the just complete scumbag who was funny as hell. And then Fun Boy, which was the complete, he's kind of a lost cause addict type of guy.
Yeah.
So these villains are this way because they're his thugs. They don't handle any of his business. They handle his setting fires all over the city. They handle going to people's apartments like they did Eric Draven's apartment, shake people down and do all his dirty work. That's why they're the dumb ones who where Tony Todd is his smart kind of henchman. That's what I got out of it.
I like Tony Todd in the movie, and like I said, the other actor Gideon, but like T-Bird, and I understand he's supposed to be the more intelligent one. He doesn't strike me as particularly intelligent the way that he's played. That's just that's
what I'm saying. Intelligent compared to Tony Todd, no, but compared to Skank and compared to Fun Boy, he's
compared to them. But like Tintin reminded, and this is what it reminds me of. And this is another Batman, like Batman '89. The Joker has like a bunch of goons that are kind of like lame. They're not really like threats to the movie, and they're kind of like jokes. They even has a scene in this that reminds me a little bit like Tintin reminds me of the Asian character who pops out behind a trash can in Batman '89 and starts doing this weird, wild shit, like this overly exaggerated stuff with the swords. But I think the difference is those characters in Batman '89 don't have as much lines or screen time. In this movie, they choose to give those types of henchman characters more personality. That, and look, again, this is just for me, and I know that it's the way that it's directed. They're supposed to be overly greasy, but a lot of their line deliveries kind of just don't work for me. They kind of have like an eye roll quality to them. Like, I enjoy seeing them get messed up just because Brandon Lee's awesome in the movie. But I don't know, they just seem a little bit too goofy for me. I do like Tony Todd. And the only thing is, at the end, the Crow is so powerful. And I get that throughout most of the movie, I don't really think most of these people are credible threats, and I don't buy that they're ever going to have any triumph over him. And then they show his weakness, but for me, that weakness comes at a very late point at the film. Like, you need to give the ending stakes. Whereas, like, I kind of wish I would have knew about the weakness a little bit earlier in the movie, because the performances would have still been the same, but it would have felt slightly more dangerous to me. Like, I know that he could get hurt. It feels like once we get to the climax, I could sense the writers going, at this point, these guys are not much of a threat, so we need to put in this weakness. And I feel that should have been introduced a lot earlier in the movie, and I think it could have made it the climax for me a little bit more exciting. It just feels like, okay, now he has this weakness that we didn't know about until the very end of the movie. I think that element could have been pushed up a little faster.
Well, the sister was kind of brainstorming throughout.
Yeah.
Like wait a minute, the Crow is his power.
Mm-hmm.
And then they kind of hatched this plan. But I see what you mean. And also, it could have been left on the cutting room floor because we had the Skull Cowboy.
A lot of stuff in this movie is left on the cutting room floor. Like, from what I understand, there's like there's whole characters and whole concepts and ideas that didn't make it into the movie. I'm willing to give it to the benefit of the doubt. I'm kind of shocked that the movie comes out as complete as it comes across, because I don't know at what point Brandon Lee died in the movie. But for all intents and purposes, it looks like he finished his performance. It doesn't look like there's anything missing. But I know they probably had to do a lot of different reshoots and adding things and changing elements to kind of get it to that point. So I'm willing to bet there probably is some of that stuff probably is missing, and there is a chance that they just didn't get a chance to shoot it.
Yeah. But I have to go to another scene that really stands out to me, like the whole sequence. You see Tintin leaving the pawn shop, and another great song selection, Nine Inch Nails' Dead Soul starts playing, and then the Crow kind of leads Eric across the rooftops. So you got Nine Inch Nails' Dead Souls playing, you got Brandon Lee jumping over the rooftops as he heads toward Tintin, and then You see another one that reminded me of Sam Raimi, where you see the crow's POV, where it's you see the crow's POV, and the frame shifts and gets skewed, just like on Sam Raimi. And then Eric Draven does a swan dive, off the building into the trash, and he laughs, and that kind of startles Tintin. And then right when you hear him laugh, you see him walking toward Tintin, and there's a view of him through the trash fire. I love the way all that plays out.
Who's the villain who gets their mouth taped and then run off, put in the car and then driven off the edge where the car explodes?
T-Bird. Yeah, it's T-Bird.
Okay, T-Bird. That has the coolest visual in the movie to me is after when and again, when I watch this again, I hadn't seen it in a while, but when he lights the fire and then the crow symbol comes in, it's so cool because it shows the spirit of the movie where like I said, I think this is not heightened. It's not supposed to be like ultra realistic. The emotions are real, but the surroundings are not realistic. That part right there is comic booky in the best possible way. Like the things that we love about comic books, the big iconic imagery, the things that capture your mind. And I hadn't seen it in a while, but I think that's the image that sticks with me over the years when I see this movie, because every time I think of this movie, I picture a crow on fire, or like a silhouette of an outline of a crow in fire. And I think it does a good job of like selling these really grand gothic comic book imagery as being so cool and so poetic and so heightened.
And it's also cool because he's not doing it to look cool. He's doing it to send a message to the others. I'm coming for you next. I'm going to do the same thing to you. Yeah, but it looks so cool. That's the best thing about it. And then another thing about the fight with Tintin, the first thing I thought when I watched this, because when I watched this, I was excited to see Brandon Lee, the martial artist, who I had fallen in love with in Rapid Fire and Showdown in Little Tokyo. And that's why I was so excited to see this movie. He comes out and you see the first bit of his fighting. I was like, holy shit, he's not doing martial arts. But what the greatest thing of it, he's not doing martial arts, but it's still pretty violent, and it still looks like he's hitting hard. But so it looks like real fighting, but it's also still graceful as martial arts. He's doing very realistic, very grounded fighting where it looks like he's hitting them, and he's not doing any kind of martial arts, but it's still very graceful and very beautiful to watch.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean,
and then
I think it has to be, especially with it being Brandon Lee and who his father's legacy was. I feel like a lot of his film career, whether he wanted to or not, he had to prove something to audiences. Not that it was fair that he had to prove those things to the audiences, but his father being Bruce Lee, it kind of forced him into these roles. This is cool because I think this shows him branching off where there's still a foot left in there, but this is also not the type of role I could have ever pictured Bruce Lee playing either. This is not something I could have ever pictured Bruce Lee in. So this is like the kind of his transition movie where it still gives you a taste of that, but it was giving you an idea of what was to come in his future, or sadly, what would have been if not for the accident that happened on here.
Yeah, and besides the fighting, his acting during those scenes, like you're not seeing a comic book character mess up these stupid villains in a satisfying way. That's not all that is. I feel every time that it's a person in pain, in anguish, who he wants nothing more than to see these guys suffer, and you feel it. And the conviction he has when he grabs Tintin and looks in his face and he says, I want you to tell me a story. A woman and a man in a loft a year ago. And just his conviction gives me chills every time. And Tintin tries to say something smartass and he's like, listen, I'm sure you remember. It's everything he says. It's just like, I feel it so intensely. And not just because I feel it in the context of the movie, but there's that added element of him being really dead. This is a man coming back from being killed and getting revenge on these people and feeling the anguish of his death. and he's really dead. It's something about that makes it even more poetic and more hard hitting every time. And that's why I think this has become so special to people, where they don't think they can ever make another Crow again.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why, because it's so him, and
I mean, it has a vibe that's very hard to recreate or pull off. I think that's why a lot of people don't want to see it again. And it's like I said, I think this is very challenging material, because with the wrong actors, some of this could come across bad. I actually think a lot of Brandon Lee's lines could potentially be bad if the actor behind it. Not that the writing is bad, but the writing is going for something so poetic that it requires real gifts. And I think that's something that's going to be hard to pull off. Also, you don't really see that many movies that even attempt to do it, even attempt to do that type of style or to do what this does. The only reason that I don't feel that's fair is because The Crow did exist as a comic book before. And there are different versions of The Crow, from what I understand. Eric Draven is, so they should probably look into like trying to do something a little bit different. But since it's like an original concept that came from an artist, I don't think that we should. I mean, yeah, you should honor the legacy in this film, and obviously, it's very sad what happened on it. It's tragic, but I don't think that means that there shouldn't be another Crow movie. I don't think if it's fair to who's the creator? I think it's Mike Barr.
James O'Barr.
James O'Barr, why did I say that? I don't know if that's fair to James O'Barr to say, no, your creation can never be redone again because they made such an iconic movie out of it. I think that it is possible to still make a good movie out of the Crow concept. I think it's a really cool concept. I think it's really cinematic. And I actually do think there is another good movie to be made out of this idea.
But it could, yeah, but they just failed so many times already.
But those are like direct-to-video cheap cash-ins.
I know, but then they tried again, and they were going to put Jason Momoa as the Crow. So it seems like they're still not they're not thinking right.
I mean, I think right now that they're going for is Bill Skarsgård.
Yeah.
If there is a good choice, then that's a good choice. I mean, Jason Momoa is a weird choice. Like, I get why they would pick him, but he's a weird choice. I think Bill Skarsgård is a little bit closer to the Brandon Lee archetype of the Crow. Also, I think it would be kind of strange to see a goth that jacked up and huge. I mean, not that goth can't be buff. Goths can't be buff. But I think there's something a little bit more for a dead character too, he should be a little bit more wraith-like. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Obviously, you have to be in good shape to play this role because of the physical requirements. But any character that's like death haunting should have a more wraith-like feel. And I do think it's possible. I think that Bill Skarsgård could be a good pick for this role.
Yeah. I mean, I'm all for another Crow movie, especially since you said there's other Crows.
Yeah, there's other Crows.
But I'm not saying they can't make another one, and they could very well make another good movie with Eric Draven. But just the circumstances surrounding this, and just that so many failed attempts at redoing The Crow and bringing Eric Draven back, I just think the fans don't want to see Eric Draven.
Mm-hmm.
Like they've got their Eric Draven, and he died making it, and he didn't just die making it. He gave us a legacy of this character that he was perfect for, and then you can see in every time he opens his mouth, you feel that Brandon Lee had in his head, this is the performance of my career, and I'm going to put everything into this performance, and I'm going to leave it all on set. And that's what he did, and he even left his life there. So I think that's the reason why I'm not as dead set against it as some fans are, but I just think he'll always be Eric Draven, and I think it'll be understandable that anybody else trying that specific role is going to get some backlash over it.
Yeah, I mean, it's bound to happen. It's bound to happen. It's just, I actually do think this is a good concept for a series, and I think, and that's another thing, they could very well do other Crows, but to reintroduce this, I think that might even cause, in a sense, more backlash or more disinterested into it, because to some people, the Crow is Eric Draven. That's the character. I think if you wanted to like do other ones to like reintroduce audience to the Crow concept and give you other characters who were the Crow, you have to start with Eric Draven. You have to start with something that the audience is already familiar with or has some grounding before. And like I said, it's also the approach. Other movies that came out, The Crow, those are really cheap cash-in movies. They're not with kind of any kind of artistry or skill. I've seen a couple of them. One of them, I don't remember which one, but I could only sit through 20 minutes of it because it was actively irritating because it was so bad. But I think the concept deserves a good director, another director who understands it again. And I think it's a shame that those movies kind of sully it in a certain way. In all fairness, though, those movies are kind of forgotten in a way.
Yeah.
And I don't think that it's going to ever erase the legacy of what Brandon Lee did with this movie. That even if they make a Crow, it's never going to take away from what this movie is or replace it culturally or anything. If anything, I actually think a Crow remake, and this is a good thing for a lot of remakes, I think it would bring more attention to the original movie. I think people who never watched the original before might check out the original now. I think it could introduce it to a whole new set of audience members, because to some people, I think it's just this legendary film that like kind of swirls around the death of Brandon Lee. But if you told audiences a new one's coming out, I'm pretty sure you would get a rush of new people checking it out, and you would get a whole new generation of fans.
Well, also, this is also a group of artists getting together, trying to do something as artistic and as stylistic as they could, and as special as they could. And then, especially when the new adaptation, when they were trying to cast Jason Momoa, and it's not just the casting of Jason Momoa, it's just those pictures that they had of him in the makeup test, where he's kind of standing there with the light shining on his pecs and shit. Like, you guys don't get it. It's obvious that it's a big movie studio trying to cash in on this concept, instead of just put some artists together who are passionate about this story.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the only thing that's rubbed me the wrong way. I mean, make a movie, but get some artists involved, some really good director and some really good actors and stuff. But Bill Skarsgård would definitely be a much better choice.
Yeah.
But some of the best scenes in this movie for me had all the elements in them. Had the like this scene the pawn shop scene, mm-hmm. where he goes to see Gideon. It has horror, it has comedy, it has deep emotion, it has poetry. Everything is in that scene. You get this great horror suspense scene of Eric Draven kind of stalking Gideon before he comes in. He's kind of scaring him and frightening him at first before he comes in. Then he comes in and quotes the Raven. Another thing, anybody else walking in like that with makeup on, quoting the Raven, it wouldn't have worked, but it's worked so well with him.
Oh yeah, correct.
And then when he fucking shakes up Gideon, and their whole exchange is funny to me, because
mm-hmm.
Eric Draven is wisecracking, and then Gideon is just like this slimy pawn shop owner who takes advantage of everybody, and he's just like screaming and yelling at him. But it's
he's
so
one
funny.
of the villains that I did like, but I think that actor is really good with those slimy characters, because when I see him, I recognize him all the time. I always have to look up what other movies he's in, but I was like, there's that slimy guy from those movies every time I see him.
Yeah. But the part that gets me every time, and I get a tear in my eye every time, when he's already fucked up Gideon, right? And he goes into the back and he looks for his fiance's engagement ring. And he's where's your rings? Where's your rings? You get this big box full of rings, and he's taking them out and tossing them to the side. Mm-hmm. And then he gets her ring, and he starts seeing flashbacks of their good times together, because that ring doesn't represent the attack, it represents the great times. So you can feel his emotion, because you just got through seeing a very stylized scene, very horror scene, and then all of a sudden you're feeling this, you're sitting in the floor with Brandon Lee, and he's feeling this intense, deep emotion. And then it culminates in him pouring the remainder of the rings into the shotgun. And one of my favorite shots of the movie, it shows a close-up of the end of the shotgun as the rings come blowing out of it.
That's pretty cool too.
Into the pawn shop, and then you get the big explosion.
That's
I love that whole thing.
Probably my second favorite visual after the Fire Crow.
Yeah.
That by the way, that actress is I don't know if we mentioned it earlier was Linda
Oh,
Boyd. Linda Boyd plays Darla Moore, who plays
oh,
Sarah's mom in The Crow.
I thought that was Anna Thompson.
No. It is no. Actually, Anna Levine in the movie. I apologize. In the TV show, it's Linda Boyd. I didn't even know there was a television
Oh,
series.
okay.
Did you?
No.
Okay, so that just shows you that this has been attempted more times than I even realized. I was gonna say I actually like her performance a lot. I think she's kind of underrated in this movie, and I think her relationship with the daughter sells some of the more human elements, and it it makes Brandon Lee's character a little bit more human. The relationship he has with Sarah, and the thing that he does for his that's one of my favorite scenes in the movie too. Is when he's kind of like telling the mom, you have a daughter out there and she's looking for she's waiting for you. And I actually think it's a pretty touching scene that they have in their house together when she's making eggs and she thinks she messed up the eggs and she almost tosses them out and her daughter convinces her not to do it. I think it's stuff like that that helps to elevate some of what the character of the Crow is, where he's not just a dark gothic emotional avenger. He's actually a force for good, and he's not just getting revenge. He's actually trying to like set things right in a way, like spread some kind of positive influence of love. Where you know what I mean, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a small scene, there's a small little thing about the scene with the mother and the daughter, too. Because the mother obviously listened to Brandon Lee in that scene where he told her, you have to take care of your daughter. So she was listening to her. So she was trying to be good. And then the daughter is so hardened from her mom neglecting her so much. She kind of sits there and she has this line where she goes, "Oh, so what did you take this time to become mother of the year?" And the mom is like, "You know what? Fuck it. I tried." And she starts throwing the eggs away. And Sarah gets that beautiful look on her face. She changes in that instant. Oh, wait a minute. I want you to be like this. Stay like this. So she has that instance of turning into the
Mm-hmm.
defiant teenager who's been neglected to the one who needs a mom,
Mm-hmm.
just in that second.
Yeah.
But that brings me back to the scene before the Fun Boy kill. It starts with Brandon Lee being perched up on the sign as Fun Boy is just getting high with his girlfriend. He's shooting up and shit. But this is another scene like the pawn shop scene where it mixes horror and comedy. Where when you see Brandon Lee coming in and stalking him, he looks crazy to me. And he says he's stalking him. He has this crazy look in his eyes, like, I want to get in and freak this guy out as much as I can before I just completely destroy him. You can see it all in his face. And then that's one of my favorite scenes where Eric just he gets in the mirror and he pulls the mom just roughly into the mirror, and he forces her to look at herself, and then he squeezes her arm, and you can see the morphine leaking out of her arm.
Mm-hmm.
And I get the tears flow every time he recites that line. He says, he just squeezing her arm and he looks at her in the eyes through the mirror, says, "Mom is the word for God in the lips and hearts of all children." Another very poetic line that was delivered perfectly, and that's why it was so effective. It could have been so cheesy.
Yeah.
And then that leads to another one of my favorite scenes, which very emotional scene, which I didn't realize it, but when Eric shows up in Albrecht's apartment and he starts asking him, he basically asking Albrecht, what happened to Shelley? I want to know her last moments of life. So he kind of grabs him and just kind of sees her death through him. And you can feel it so intensely where I found out that the end of the scene was improvised, the most touching part of the scene. So you already see these two phenomenal actors, both of them very natural, both of them very it's a very natural chemistry, and they have that instant bond that you can feel. And the characters are supposed to be bonding, but you feel like the actors are bonding too. So these guys are acting their asses off, and then Brandon Lee finishes the scene with this line: "Shelley used to care about the little things, and I used to think they were so trivial. Nothing's trivial." The tears come every time
Yeah.
because that's another thing you just keep thinking of. because he was actually engaged to be married in real life. So just knowing that he had a fiance waiting for him at home, waiting for him to finish this movie so they could have this beautiful wedding that they planned. And he had gone through all the most grueling filming, and he was all done. He just had one or two, finishing scenes to film that were fairly easy, and that's how he got killed. So that's why it drives that scene home even more for me every time.
I think that this, it's unfortunate that it happens with a movie like this. And I mean, to a lesser extent, to a movie like The Dark Knight, it's the tragedies of the movies themselves, of the performers involved, end up having some kind of effect on the film, whether it's intended or not. And it's not actually part of the artistic intention, but you can't erase it. You can't erase it from there. Whether or not the movie actually meant to be, it's more resonant than it's supposed to be because of the reality of it. But it's not because the filmmaker wanted it to be more resonant. It's unfortunate that it is. But it has a quality where accident isn't really the word, but there are some things about this that make this movie drive home more than it should.
Yeah. And actually, I want to talk a little bit about the T-Bird kill. And this is where I'm going to disagree with you about T-Bird. This is where T-Bird shined for me. Before he was before his kill scene, he was a sort of a caricature, but brilliant casting, because he's the guy from the Warriors, the kind of etched in a lot of our minds at the time as being the guy that comes out and says, okay, Warriors, come out and play.
I'm gonna tell you something. I've never seen the Warriors.
Oh, okay, no wonder.
So I don't have any kind of association. Like, to me, this was like the first time I recognized the guy.
But also, he's not only a character from an iconic movie that a lot of us recognize at the time, he's also a classically trained actor and an excellent character actor. So in this scene, he was really able to shine with his excellent acting, because this is where he got to deliver some great poetic lines that really worked for me anyway. So like when he's first tying him in and he's trying to get answers, speak. He has this weird way of like shouting way of speaking, and he has this delivery that I've always loved. There ain't no coming back. This is the really real world. There ain't no coming back. So it's just that delivery, the really real world. Who even says that? It works for me. And then right before he knows he's about to die, and he kind of changes attitude. He feels defeated, like he knows he's about to die. And then he goes back to it harkens back to the attack against Shelley. You've seen in one of the attack scenes that just to terrorize Shelley, T-Bird picks up this book and starts reading this poetry out of it. So as he's just about to die, he kind of resigns to the fact that he's going to die. And I love his delivery when it said, abashed the devil stood and felt how awful goodness is. And felt how awful goodness is. See, that's where I have to disagree with you that's moments like that make these villains a little more than caricatures. And immediately, almost immediately following that, Skank does the same thing. Every time I crack up when Skank goes back to Top Dollar and he's kind of reenacts T-Bird's death. He came in all painted up like a dead whore. And then he's all drinking because he's depressed over his friend dying. He starts doing fire it up. So that was all kind of cool for me too.
That's fair. It's just, I don't know, the villains mostly just, they don't, it's just something about it that doesn't work for me.
And I have to mention, right after you see that funny scene of Skank kind of reenacting T-Bird's death, the mob meeting scene, that's always been a big standout for me, just because of the ultra violence of it. Just the fact that, okay, I've seen this in many scenes before, where you see where the mob, all the mob bosses have the same threat, so they're dealing with the same threat, so they kind of meet to see how they're going to deal with the threat. So it kind of plays out like it always does. You get Top Dollar in the middle of this big table full of gangsters with guns everywhere, and he's giving this big villain monologue, and all of a sudden Eric Draven just traipses up, walks in the middle of the room with just this presence, and then he jumps up on the table and just starts shooting everybody, and he gets shot. And I love the beautiful choreography in that one. Some of those shots where he would get shot and he would fall to the ground, and his momentum would pick him back up off the ground again, and he'd shoot somebody else. And that whole extra ultra violent, but also beautifully poetically filmed.
You know, this is weird, and it's not a comment on the movie. I just find this interesting that life ends up the way that it does. Is Heath Ledger's has a very similar scene in The Dark Knight where it's a bunch of mob bosses meeting, trying to figure out, and he kind of like traipses in and like basically steals the whole scene. I mean, that's possible, and they're both characters with makeup walking in with long hair and makeup, and they look much more theatrical than anybody else that's there. And that could be a nod to The Crow. I'm not sure if it is, but it could be. But I think it's really weird that they both ended up being actors who died before, that the context ended up being that similar is totally unintentional. That I've even seen people compare the scenes walking in. I think it's weird. I find it strange that life works out the way that it does in that way, because it has similarities that could be intentional, and then one similarity that's tragically way too close to both of them. So I always thought kind of interesting.
Well, also another little small scene that I think is so effective, and it's kind of almost just thrown in there. I think it's so beautiful, and it seems to get more beautiful each time I watch it. You just seen Eric Draven go to all these mobsters, right? Mm-hmm. And throughout the scene, he pretty much wipes all of them out, but he also gets shot several times. So not only does he get shot several times, he's weakened because his mission is done. Mm-hmm. He's killed all his killers. He done what he came back to do. So he's headed back to Shelley's grave. So you can feel his depression. You can feel his pain. And he's walking through the streets with it hanging his head, and he's weak. All his killers are dead. He has no purpose anymore. He just wants to return to his fiance's grave and die. So he walks through the streets, and then these trick-or-treaters come up, and they're kind of skipping through the street, and they shine the light on his face. And in the middle of this deep depression, he gets a smile on his face, and he kind of giggles at the trick-or-treaters. He's like, at his worst moment, at his weakest moment, he still sees the beauty of children frolicking down the street and trick-or-treating. Mm-hmm. I thought that was so touching to have these big, bombastic, violent scenes, and then throw that in right before the climax. Just a little thing just to endear you to his character even more.
Well, it's those little things that he didn't appreciate before.
Yeah, exactly. And then it leads to this great climax, which it's the first time we feel fear for Eric Draven, the first time we feel like there's a genuine threat. You get the satisfying moment of the crow pecking out Bailing's eye.
That was funny.
Yeah, and then I also feel that one part intensely where Eric grabs Top Dollar. You think Eric is done, and he grabs Top Dollar by his head and said, "Here's what I have to give you." All the pain that Shelley felt. So he kind of held all his fiance's pain inside of him. And then when he grabbed Top Dollar, he transferred it all into him. And then it ends with him impaling him over the big Gothic mausoleum. Yeah. And with the rain coming down, and then it's another view from above. And then you see the rain falling past the lens as you see Top Dollar laying there impaled. Mm-hmm. So cool. And I don't know if you knew this or not. I didn't know this. You know how my favorite actor is Christian Slater? He actually turned down the role of Eric Draven.
I don't think he would have been right for it.
No, as much as I love Christian Slater.
I think Christian Slater, especially at that point in his career. It's weird. I actually think the type of actor he is now would be able to pull it off better, but at the same time he's too old to be playing the role now. But he's too cool. He's too
Yeah.
sarcastic. He doesn't have at least in his earlier stuff, he doesn't have that kind of softness. He has like a very Jack Nicholson-esque, mischievous type of thing going on. When you think about him in Heathers, which I love it, that's one of his best performances, but he's not sympathetic at all, and he doesn't come across remotely likable. Fascinating to watch and like a ticking time bomb, but he's not like particularly likable. And when he is likable in a movie like True Romance, it's not the same type of thing as this. So I don't really see him fitting into this role like that.
No, so I'm kind of glad he turned it down.
Yeah. He
But
probably didn't fit his acting style either.
and James O'Barr actually wanted Johnny Depp. He didn't want Brandon Lee at all. And I couldn't see Johnny Depp, even though I think he could have pulled it off. I couldn't see him in it either.
That makes more sense than Christian Slater, though.
Yeah.
Especially at the time when you think of him in Edward Scissorhands, he's already gothic, and I think he's a better choice just because there's a sensitivity in those performances, and I think that's what Christian Slater is missing for a role like this. Is there has to be a little bit more sensitivity. So Johnny Depp comes a little bit more closer to that when you think of Edward Scissorhands and the vulnerability. I think that's probably what he saw in the actor at the time. Obviously, these are alternate world scenarios that we're never going to be able to guess, but he probably could have been a good Crow. He has
Yeah.
the qualities. It requires specific qualities to pull off.
What I found funny is what the studio wanted to do. When they first approached James O'Barr about adapting his comic, they wanted to do a musical starring Michael Jackson. So they tell this to James O'Barr, and he just cracks up laughing. He thought for sure it was a joke, and he kind of looked at them and they were serious. So he flat out refused. He said no. So it didn't even become a serious movie until Alex Proyas and Brandon Lee signed on. And James O'Barr did not like that a martial artist was going to be his Crow. But the moment he came in and read some of the lines from the comic, he said, holy shit, he's the Crow. He's Eric Draven.
Okay. That makes sense. I could see that.
And another thing I found interesting, it's got a really good look to it, the whole movie, but it doesn't look like a manufactured look. It looks like a very organic look, that like it was designed to look that way. And what they did is they use a sepia filter on the lenses, but then when they printed the film, they added a lot of blue to everything to eliminate the brown. So then when they went to the art directors and they were setting up the scenes and the sets, they had to be careful to leave out blue so the blue wouldn't be overwhelming. So they deliberately kind of eliminated the browns, hiked up the blues on a sepia filter. So it kind of gave it a weird, like it's not sepia, it's not any of those. It's kind of its own thing because they added so much blue. Yeah. I thought that was cool. And the Skull Cowboy character that we mentioned, that was played by Michael Berryman from Hills Have Eyes, and his scenes were cut because they couldn't. They needed more scenes with Brandon Lee, and
work.
Yeah, and they actually had a mask that looked exactly like Brandon Lee that they made for some of the stunts, and they started to use that to film those last scenes, but everyone was just too creeped out by it, so they just ended up using stunt doubles and have him, shots of him with his back turned. So a lot of the shots where you only see the back of his head, those are the ones that they added afterwards. But I thought it was really weird, kind of a weird coincidence. Out of everything that all the supposedly curse behind this movie, all these like the set burnt down, and one of the prop guys kind of ran the prop van all through the set, and like some storm came through and destroyed the set at one time. And even I think the guy that played Gideon told Brandon Lee one time, he said, I seen that scene you did before. I'm afraid you're going to die during the making of this movie. And he actually ended up dying. But in Bruce Lee's movie, The Game of Death, within the movie, he was making a movie and was shot by a prop gun on a movie set. I thought that was kind of weird, eerie. They talked about it on the Cursed Films episode of this.
Those are strange parallels.
Yeah.
It almost makes it, yeah. I don't want to speculate too much on that, but they are strange parallels.
Yeah, and I don't want to say this movie is cursed because like the guys who done the props on this and the guy who done the special effects and all that, they really don't appreciate that it was cursed. It's kind of it was a horrible accident. Don't start pushing it off on a curse
and to be honest,
sensationalize it.
I think it is a little bit disrespectful to sensationalize it, and it comes from people's need to like tack something bigger onto something to make it more, where it's an unfortunate accident that's either caused by negligence or oversight. I don't know. I feel like calling it cursed is a little bit disrespectful to what actually happened on set. Like it was preordained. It almost seems it was preordained. It was not preordained that he was going to die on this movie. He should not have died. There is no force on the set that was trying to kill Brandon Lee. It's very unfortunate, and it just comes from the human mind's need to sensationalize things.
Yeah, and so many things kind of
people who worked on the movie, why it would really irritate them.
I mean, so many things kind of randomly happened to bring that about. Like, it wasn't even supposed to. The scene wasn't even supposed to play out that way. Eric Draven was supposed to show up at the door. Tintin was supposed to throw a knife and hit him in the chest and kill him, and that would have been fine if they would have just done it that way. But at the last minute, Alex Proyas, the director, said, "You know what? I want you to shoot him when he comes in instead." And then that's what happened. So that it might have come from that. Like they kind of had to bring a prop gun back in that they didn't expect to have to bring in, and somebody didn't check that chamber.
Yeah.
So it's just a horrible accident, and I still
stuff still like this actually happens to this day, and that it happened again so recently.
And I still feel it to this day. I mean, this is probably one of the most devastating celebrity deaths of my life, just because of what a big fan I was of him, not just of his two movies that he did, Rapid Fire and Showdown in Little Tokyo, not just because I was a huge fan of them, just because I seen his potential, that he could do so much more than just martial arts. And that's what I thought when I watched Rapid Fire. So I thought, he's filming The Crow. That's a great story, and this is going to be perfect for him. So I was so excited for him, and I followed his life too. You know, I knew that he had a fiance, and he couldn't wait to get married right after. So it was just so devastating. And I have to say that after watching it again last night, I watched it 8 times in the theater and probably 100 times since then. But after watching it last night, I really believe that my nostalgia and my deep fascination with this movie and my love for this movie because of the way it happened in my life and my nostalgia for it, I think it has very little to do with how great this movie is and how great I think it is. I think it has a lot going on for it besides just my personal experience. But I think it has a whole, everything from the cinematography to the soundtrack to the acting, the style, the set design, everything just grabs me every time, and it hasn't aged a day to me. I still recall that first day watching it in the theater when I watched it. Like, I remember when I first saw that scene, I was blown away and I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. So yeah, our comic book movies, The Crow, Multiverse of Madness, and Constantine. Probably 3 of the most successful examples of comic book movies introducing horror elements into them.
Yeah. And successful financially and also successful in quality, I think.
I think so too. Yeah.
But I think in for instance, Constantine, that they had to work a lot harder on that to get it pretty good, to get it good.
Yeah, they did. They definitely did. But yeah. So Multiverse of Madness is still playing in theaters. It's going to be playing for a while with the type of money that it's making. Constantine you can watch on HBO Max. And this you could watch either on Paramount Plus or Tubi. Or no, Pluto TV. I apologize, not Tubi. Pluto TV, which is very similar to Tubi, except it's more intrusive with its commercials.
Yeah. It's kind of a bummer with that one.
Yeah. But yeah, they're all widely available movies, and these are three of the best examples of horror comic book films.
Definitely. And we'll also do another one of these because I got into thinking, when we were first trying to pick I was first trying to pick which films we were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like it seemed like there weren't that many, but then when you go back and start looking, like Blade and all those, they've been doing it for a while.
When we first came up with this episode and the first lineup that it spit out, it was going to be Multiverse of Madness, New Mutants, and what was the other one?
Brightburn.
Brightburn. And when you were like, when I was looking at the lineup and like you were looking at, I think I was like, let's substitute these movies for something different. Like we could find something better than this. And I was like, I don't want to spend that much time talking about movies I can't stand. I've never seen Brightburn. I'll openly admit it. I can't truly comment on that movie because I've never seen it. But I have not heard one positive thing from it from anybody whose opinions on movies I trust. Literally everything I've heard about it, people who share similar tastes of me, I've heard nothing positive. And I've heard and the same thing for New Mutants, and I haven't seen either one, so I can't like really trash them. I was just like, can we find something better? Like, I don't think I don't want to watch these movies that badly.
Yeah, because I watched Brightburn, and it's not overtly bad. It's just nothing happens outside of the synopsis, and there's just nothing really creative going on. It's kind of just bland.
Didn't James Gunn write that one?
I think he did, didn't he? And I think they threw out a bunch of his script, I think.
Okay, because I gotta say that's hard for me to believe because James Gunn is normally actually really good with superhero stuff and really good with horror stuff and violence and gore. That just seems like that should have been an ace in the hole right there.
I know.
But oh well. So
before we go, I wanted to mention real quick. My fellow producer and the guy that wrote the original story for The Dead Place, Chet Turner.
mm-hmm.
Check out Chet Turner on Vimeo. He's got a few short films on there, and he just released one called Into the Fold about a bass player who's trying to get initiated into a band, and he has to go through some like gory surgery. So check that one out if you get a chance. It's on Vimeo. My fellow producer wanted me to mention that.
Yeah. So also check us, keep following us on all of our social media because right now Mike and I are working on getting a feature film produced that Mike will be writing and directing. It's called The Dead Place. So we're going to be doing a very cool crowdfunding campaign with that. So to keep up with everything that we do, including the filmmaking, the podcast, and just casual horror news, follow us on facebook.com/Pickles Horror Show. There you'll get all the updates of what we're doing. You can also follow us on Instagram, which is @HorrorShowPictures. And if you want to follow us on TikTok, I had the TikTok page. It's @HorrorShowOfficial. So those are the best ways to keep up with what we're up to in the podcast and everything that we're doing. So just click the flow code link, which I put in the bio and in the description.
And besides that, we have a bunch of good interviews coming up. We're going to interview some horror authors. We're going to interview some horror filmmakers. We got the filmmakers from The Deeper You Dig and Hellbender coming up in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that, you guys. Yeah. It's the Addams Family.
Yeah, I think that's such a funny name, especially for a team of horror filmmakers. And then we'll also be interviewing Adam Caesar, who's a very successful horror author who had a blockbuster book in 2020 on Clown in a Cornfield. Might be actually made into a movie soon, so we'll see. He's got a new book coming out, a sequel, Clown in a Cornfield 2, Friendo Lives, and the debut fiction novel of Joshua Milken, who used to run Dread Central, was the top editor there. So interesting stuff coming up.
Yeah, lots of cool interviews. Plus, we'll be talking about our crowdfunding campaign and keep you updated on that. So keep checking back. We got tons of stuff coming up.
All right. Till next week, folks. Happy horror.
Happy horror.